Chapter 697. That expert from the way of the sword and the expert from the gate of heaven perished together. However, in the end, the expert from the way of the sword fell on the azure billow mountain. As for the expert from the gate of heaven, after his body was pierced, he staggered and flew into the distance. His whereabouts were unknown, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Chu Xiao was stunned. Things ended just like that? Did the two of them just inexplicably perish together like this? No, it should be one was dead while the other's status was unknown. Just at this moment, a vigorous voice came from mid-air. My sword intent inheritance. Do not help me take revenge. There is only one thing you need to remember. Destroy the heaven's gate to ensure the eternal existence of the mortal world. Chu Xiao frowned. Why did this sword Dao elite speak so incoherently? At the start, he said there was no need to help him take revenge, but at the end, he said he wanted to destroy the heaven's gate? This was even more difficult. This was something that even Dugu Weiwei couldn't do. And what was descend to the mortal world? He seemed to remember that when he entered the minor mortal hidden domain, he asked Shui Wuxiang about these things. Back then, Shui Wuxiang said that during the ancient times, there was a stone tablet erected on the peak of the highest mountain in the west, empty azure heaven. On it were the words Upper Mortal World. After the mortal world boundary monument shattered, it became the key to the minor mortal world. Chu Xiao still had quite a few of them. Why was there another descend to the mortal world now? Chu Xiao didn't really understand these ancient secrets, but the only thing he knew was that this expert had left his true inheritance of sword intent here. Speaking of which, the Azure Water Sword sect was really stupid. They could be said to have missed out on the most precious thing. Was the inheritance left behind by this sword Dao elite really the cultivation technique? In fact, it wasn't. Even though the cultivation technique was important, the more important thing was the person who cultivated the cultivation technique and the sword intent that he comprehended. After so many generations of the Azure Water Sword sect, none of them were able to comprehend the sect origin swords. Only Shen Bai managed to cultivate it by chance. In fact, it wasn't because the cultivation technique was too difficult, but because they hadn't even found the path to entry. If they were to stubbornly cultivate it, the success rate would be extremely low. Just like Chen Qingdi's fist intent, if he directly threw the fist technique to Xie Xiao Lu, with Xie Xiao Lu's aptitude, he would probably only be able to learn the basics in his lifetime. However, if he taught Xie Xiao Lu by example, then he could guarantee that Xie Xiao Lu would be able to receive his inheritance. Now, this sword principal powerhouse's inheritance was the same. It could be said that this was an existence that was even more precious than the sword techniques he had left behind. At the thought of this, Chu Xiao immediately sped towards the place where the sword principal powerhouse had fallen. When he arrived, Chu Xiao discovered that there were no corpses. There were only 3 swords floating in the air, emitting a transparent glow. One of the swords was as black as ink and emitted death intent. The other was bright blue and emitted the power of vitality. The middle sword was misty, and it was impossible to tell what attribute it had. But before Chu Xiao could make a move, someone else was faster than him. Han Tingyi, who had forgotten about the sword hut, appeared out of nowhere. With a swing of the sword in his hand, he turned into a sword light and arrived in front of the 3 swords in an instant. Chu Xiao's primordial spirit condensed into an arrow and shot out the god-exterminating arrow. The speed of the arrow was incomparably fast. With a silent whistle, it arrived behind Han Tingyi in an instant, forcing Han Tingyi to turn around to defend against this sword. A dazzling sword light lingered and a cold sword intent burst out. Han Tingyi actually used the power of sword intent to forcefully shatter the soul-exterminating arrow. After making a move, Chu Xiao suddenly frowned. That strike just now gave him a feeling that it was both real and unreal. It was as though when he shot the arrow, it wasn't a normal strike. It was as though he was recalling his past strikes and didn't even consume any spiritual energy. He seemed to have understood something. He had not traveled through time and arrived 10,000 years ago. Instead, it was the elite swordsmen who had pulled their spirits into a spiritual world that he had constructed himself. When making a move here, the power that Chu Xiao and the others used was all from their memories. To put it simply, how strong they were in their memories was how strong they were in the spiritual world. Here, even if they used cultivation techniques like blood ignition, it wouldn't hurt their physical body. If this spiritual world could be casually entered, then it would be a great place to practice martial skills. It was unknown if Han Tingyi noticed that something was wrong with this place. He just glared at Chu Xiao and said, Chu Xiao, you are a saber user. Why are you here? Why were there so many sword sects among the martial artists that came to Azure Water Sword Sect? It was because they knew that the Azure Water Sword Sect's secret treasures were only related to the sword. What was the use of other martial artists that didn't practice the sword coming here? Only a weirdo like Chu Xiao, who obviously didn't use the sword, but still came here to join in the fun. Chu Xiao spoke indifferently, drawing parallels. Who said that a saber can't use a sword? Han Tingyi heard this and was infuriated. Chu Xiao was obviously harming others without benefiting himself, and he couldn't do anything about it. It was just a single exchange, but Han Tingyi already knew that he couldn't defeat Chu Xiao. At least he couldn't force Chu Xiao to retreat so easily. Right now, the others were also rushing over. If they delayed any longer, it would be another chaotic battle. Therefore, Han Tingyi directly said, All right, if you want to draw parallels, there are 3 sword intent inheritances here. You can pick one first, and the other 2 belong to me. Chu Xiao shook his head and said, This is not enough. My 2 friends also use the sword, so I want all 3 sword intents. Han Tingyi's face revealed an angry expression. Before he could say anything, the other 2 figures rushed towards the sword intents. These 2 were Chang Tingshan and the martial artist from Storm Sword Tomb. The 3 of them were in a chaotic battle. Chu Xiao didn't make a move. If he made a move, he wouldn't be able to benefit from it. It would probably turn into a 4-man battle. The entire Azure Water Mountain was only so big. In just a short moment, Feng Qishao and the others had arrived. Seeing this scene, Feng Qishao couldn't help but shake his head and said, This expert is too much. Isn't it just a sword intent inheritance? Why don't you give a few more? How can there be enough to distribute now? As he said that, Feng Qishao poked Chu Xiao. What should we do? Directly snatch it? However, at this time, Feng Qishao realized that Chu Xiao didn't respond to him. He just stared at the battle between the 3 people. He couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Was Chu Xiao afraid? It shouldn't be. With Chu Xiao's personality, not to mention the 3 martial Dao masters in front of him, even if it was a true fire spirit refinement powerhouse in front of him, as long as there were benefits, Chu Xiao would dare to plot against them. Just as Feng Qishao wanted to say something, Chu Xiao suddenly said, Do you know where this is? 7th young master Feng was taken aback. Don't take me for an idiot. This is 10,000 years in the past. I don't know how that swordsman managed to send us 10,000 years in the past. Could it be that he cultivates a martial art that has something to do with time or space? Hearing Feng Qishao's words, Chu Xiao finally understood what the problem was. When he saw the 3 people fighting earlier, Chu Xiao felt that something was wrong because the 3 of them didn't use their full strength. Chu Xiao had already seen through what was going on in this world. This was simply a spiritual world simulated by someone. Even if one burned their blood essence, it would not affect the outside world. Therefore, when they attacked, they didn't have to care so much at all. They just used their strongest moves. However, Han Tingyi and the other 2 always held back, as if they were fighting in the outside world. Now that Chu Xiao asked Feng Qishao, he finally understood that the essence of this world should have been discovered by him. Although the others didn't know what was going on with them, it was obvious that they must have thought that they were in a world. They didn't expect that their bodies and spirits had been separated. In fact, Chu Xiao was able to discover this purely by accident. If Chu Xiao had been using a normal cultivation technique, he definitely wouldn't have been able to discover this. This was because the spiritual world was too realistic. It was so realistic that the cultivation techniques they used came from his memories, from himself. It was only when Chu Xiao used the soul-destroying arrow that he felt that something was wrong. This was because he didn't feel the consumption of his spiritual power. This world was originally virtual, with their spiritual power as the core. This was the most essential thing. Therefore, this world could simulate the consumption of spiritual qi, but it couldn't simulate the changes of the spiritual power itself. Apart from Chu Xiao, no one else present was proficient in secret spiritual techniques. Perhaps after a period of time, they would also be able to think of this. However, at least for now, only Chu Xiao and the others could guess this. Looking at Feng Qishao and Lu Fengxian, Chu Xiao said in a low voice, "Do the 2 of you trust me?" Lu Fengxian was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, "Of course I trust you." Feng Qishao chuckled and said, I do, but it depends on what it is. For example, if you say that you're more handsome than me, I definitely won't believe you. Another example. Chu Xiu didn't continue to listen to Feng Qixiao's example. He directly transmitted his voice and said, "If you trust me, then burn your blood essence later. Erupt with your strongest power and attack with all your might. Snatch those 3 sword intents together. This world is a virtual spiritual world. Even if we burn our blood essence here, it won't affect the outside world." Chu Xiu's words were indeed a little shocking. Burning one's blood essence was something that could cause serious injuries if not handled properly. If you said that this was a virtual world, then it was a virtual world. If something went wrong, who would be responsible? Therefore, Chu Xiu asked them if they believed him. Only they believed that the 3 of them could force Han Tingyi and the others to retreat if they attacked together. If they hesitated, it would be ineffective. Feng Qixiao was stunned and said, "Virtual? Interesting. You can play it like this?" Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "No problem. It's useless for me to get the sword intent's inheritance, so I have to give my share to Fian." After all, it was Chu Xiu's idea. Although it was up to him to decide who to give the things to after getting them, Lu Fengxian also told Chu Xiu in advance to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. After all, Chu Xiu and the Yu Palace still had some conflicts before. Chapter 698. Chu Xiu and the other 2 had joined forces to set up a trap without bringing Mot on Lin. It was not that they were deliberately rejecting Mot on Lin, but that Mo Tianlin's own strength was too low. Rashly making a move would instead appear fake. Although Mo Tianlin also had the strength of unity of heaven and man, his unity of heaven and man was still a long way off compared to Feng Qixiao and Lu Fengxian. Chu Xiu, on the other hand, secretly glanced at Lu Fengxian and shook his head slightly. Lu Fengxian was now doing everything for Yan Fian's sake. Obviously, he was already deeply in love with her. In fact, Lu Fengxian was such a person. If he used you as a shield for his friends, he would be willing to risk his life for you. And now, since he regarded Yan Fian as his lover, it was naturally even more normal for him to do all this. Unfortunately, sometimes, not everyone would accept your kindness and love and then return it. Most people would take it for granted. Chu Xiu, Lu Fengxian, and Feng Qixiao looked at each other and immediately made a move. In an instant, the qi and blood around the 3 of them soared to the sky. They actually chose to directly burn their blood essence. Chu Xiu had already stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. The strength of Feng Qixiao and Lu Fengxian was also not inferior to that of a martial Dao Grandmaster. The power of these 3 people burning their qi and blood was simply terrifying. Feeling the power of Chu Xiu and the other 2, the expressions of Han Tingyi and the other 2 suddenly changed. Was this Chu Xiu crazy? He actually chose to burn his blood essence at this time, just for a sword intent inheritance. Was it worth it? Moreover, he himself did not use a sword. And Feng Qixiao and Lu Fengxian were the same. Were young people nowadays so desperate? Or were these old fellows really a little afraid of death? Within the spiritual world, Chu Xiu did not need to worry about any exhaustion. Hence, when he attacked, he did not directly use any other martial techniques. Instead, he wanted to test out the martial technique that he was unable to control, the strongest saber move belonging to Duguwewa, the ethereal mortal slash. In fact, Chu Xiu did not know whether this move was used or not. In the past, when he was facing Divine Lord Luo, Chu Xiu used this move. However, at that time, Chu Xiu was in a state of chaos, and he did not really use this move. It was just a stance. In this fictional spiritual world, Chu Xiu did not have to worry about anything. He did not have to worry about anything. He could boldly use the red dust slash. Chu Xiu raised his saber and released a profound aura. Everything in front of him started to freeze. The entire space became like a mirror, appearing before Chu Xiu. There was a look of surprise in Han Tingyi's eyes because Chu Xiu's target was him. Among the 3, Cheng Tingfeng's strength was not too strong. Chu Xiu did not know much about the martial artist from Wind Cloud Sword Tomb, but he should not be one of the famous martial arts masters in Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. Therefore, Han Tingyi should be the strongest among them. Of course, Chu Xiu chose him as the first target. Under the misty red dust slash, Han Tingyi felt as if his entire body had been imprisoned in this space. No matter how he struggled, he was unable to break free. At this time, Han Tingyi was almost going crazy. As a veteran martial arts master, he could certainly feel the power of Chu Xiu's saber. But it was precisely because of this that he did not understand. Chu Xiu burned all the essence and blood in his body to slash this powerful saber. It was as if he was risking his life. No, it should be said that he was risking his life. However, he did not seem to have a deep grudge with Chu Xiu. He was just fighting with him for the sword intent inheritance. This was a very normal thing. Why did Chu Xiu have to be so angry and fight with him? Chu Xiu wanted to fight with his life, but he did not want to die with Chu Xiu here. Therefore, at this moment, Han Tingyi's body shone with a dazzling white light. The martial artists of the sword hut practiced sword techniques, understood the theory of the sword, and understood sword intent. They cultivated the way of the sword, so their foundation was extremely solid. Han Tingyi had already comprehended sword intent and raised it to the extreme, forging his own indestructible sword soul. His entire body's essence, qi, spirit, and blood had become one. Han Tingyi's eyes were already lifeless, but the long sword in his hand was still shining brightly. As the sword slashed down, the power of the misty red dust slash that seemed to be imprisoning the void began to loosen. But at this moment, Chu Xiu's saber also fell at the same time. Like a mirror, Chu Xiu slashed on the outside, and Han Tingyi slashed on the inside. There was a silent loud sound, and the space was torn apart. Everything was like a mirror, shattering. Han Tingyi's eyes regained their color. At the same time, he looked at his body with a look of horror in his eyes. The sword soul was a powerful sword technique that he was still unable to master. It was even possible that his martial arts would be crippled if he made a mistake. Moreover, even if he did not cripple his martial arts, he would definitely suffer a backlash. But now, he had clashed head-on with Chu Xiu, and he was not injured at all. What was going on? At this moment, Han Tingyi also saw that Chu Xiu's blood was burning fiercely, but he was still heading toward the sword intent inheritance. His expression suddenly changed. Han Tingyi was not an idiot. After seeing this scene, he immediately realized what was going on. However, it was too late. He could only watch as Chu Xiu took the black sword intent inheritance in his hand. With a flash of light, the sword intent inheritance instantly integrated into Chu Xiu's body. And it was not only Chu Xiu, but also Lu Fengxian and Feng Qishao. Feng Qishao's strength was already comparable to some martial arts masters. His opponent was Cheng Tingfeng. Under the Karma Sword principle, he obtained the Misty Sword intent inheritance when Cheng Tingfeng subconsciously retreated. As for LV Fengxian, she directly took out her unparalleled divine weapon. Although it was such a simple halberd strike, the might it exuded was enough to shake the heavens and earth. It was extremely terrifying, directly forcing that expert from the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb to retreat. He also managed to obtain the inheritance of the unparalleled divine weapon. Originally, the inheritance of sword intent should have been able to directly enter their minds. However, LV Fengxian waved his hand and directly sent his inheritance of sword intent into Yan Fian's body. This caused Yan Fian's expression to instantly become somewhat complicated. Seeing that Lu Fengxian and Feng Qishao had clearly burned their blood essence, but now nothing happened to them, everyone present had already realized that something was wrong. Han Tingyi's group looked at Chu Xiu's group with an incomparably gloomy gaze. They had miscalculated. The three of them were all veterans, and the youngest among them had already stepped into the martial arts master realm for more than a decade. In the end, they were actually schemed against by three juniors. How embarrassing. Right at this moment, there was a sudden long sigh in midair. Everything in front of them was like a mirror that immediately shattered. When everyone opened their eyes again, they were still in the Azure Water Sword Sect's underground cave. Even their positions didn't change at all. The only change was that the sword chi that was originally soaring into the sky, and the white jade-like skeleton was now grayish-white and dilapidated. As the airflow in the underground cave swept across, it actually turned into dust. In all fairness, this sword principal powerhouse was really a kind person. There were often some ancient experts who left behind inheritances, but at the same time, they would also leave behind all sorts of tests to test if one was qualified to inherit their inheritance. Moreover, most of these tests were incomparably dangerous. If one wasn't careful, they would even lose their life there. And this sword Dao expert was simply a clean stream among the ancient experts. He didn't even leave behind the slightest test. He just played the scene back then and told the descendants to help him take revenge. Then, he threw out the inheritance without any restrictions. Even if one got the inheritance but didn't want to help him take revenge, there was no loss at all. Whether it was now or in the past, there were very few such honest people. It was a pity that the forgetful sword hut and the other forces only obtained some remnant 10,000 swords returned to origin. They didn't even get a single one of the most valuable sword intent inheritance. Looking at Chu Xiu's group, Han Tingyi and the others surrounded them with gloomy expressions. Chu Xiu sneered. Why? Just now was just an act, and now you want to do it for real? All right then, we will accompany you to the end. Han Tingyi's group glanced at each other and ultimately didn't make a move. They didn't even leave any harsh words and immediately turned to leave. Of course they weren't afraid, but it wasn't worth it to make a move now. The sword intent inheritance had already been absorbed into the body of Chu Xiu's group. Even if they killed Chu Xiu's group, they still wouldn't be able to obtain it. Most importantly, in that spiritual world, everything might be fabricated, but this fabricated reality was based on reality. Only Chu Xiu's group had that kind of strength, and they were able to exhibit this level of strength in the virtual world. During the battle just now, they had already seen it clearly. Even if it was in reality, if Chu Xiu's group used this life-risking method, they still wouldn't be able to withstand it. Therefore, there was no longer any meaning to continue fighting. Let alone the fact that they couldn't win. If they continued to fight, both sides would still suffer. The Azure Water Sword Sect's mountain was still densely packed with martial artists, and they were still waiting for the results. In everyone's guesses, these major sword sects and Chu Xiu would definitely have a great battle. But in the end, they didn't seem to hear any commotion at the foot of the mountain. In less than 2 hours, the major sword sects members had already left with dark expressions. What was going on? After a moment, Chu Xiu's group also left. After arriving at an uninhabited place, Chu Xiu's group then took out the 10,000 swords returned to origin fragment and exchanged it. Previously in the cave, they more or less obtained some 10,000 swords returned to origin fragment. Even though the few of them combined weren't able to gather the complete 10,000 swords returned to origin fragment, it was still an absolute sword arts fragment. It was still very useful to them, at least they could comprehend it by analogy. Just as they were exchanging the fragment, Chu Xiu walked towards the Yu Nu Palace's group. Chapter 699. Because of the conflict between Chu Xiu and the Yu Nu Palace in the past, his image in the eyes of the Yu Nu Palace's people was definitely not good. Even because of his relationship with Lu Fengxian, the Yu Nu Palace and Chu Xiu were no longer at loggerheads like before. But subconsciously, the disciples of the Yu Nu Palace still had some fear and vigilance towards Chu Xiu. Walking in front of Yan Fian, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Can I say a few words in private?" Yan Fian nodded, indicating for Wan and the other female disciples of the Yu Nu Palace to leave. She said in a low voice, "What does official Chu want to ask?" Chu Xiu looked at the horizon and said in a low voice, "You know my relationship with Brother Lu. Although in the eyes of outsiders, Brother Lu hangs out with people of the demonic path like me and doesn't do those chivalrous things, he is actually a good person. He is a person who will return 10 times to you if you treat him well. Unfortunately, in this world, good people usually don't live long. If I didn't know Brother Lu, then I naturally wouldn't care about those things. But with my relationship with Brother Lu, there are some things that I can't ignore. Miss Yan, let me give you a word of advice. In the future, think before you act. The road of Jianghu is long, but the road of life is long. The ebb and flow of the tide is very normal. Don't lose yourself for the sake of the sect. Throughout history, it's not rare to find nothing after calculating all sorts of schemes in Jianghu." Yan Fian frowned and said, "I don't quite understand what you're saying." Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Whether you understand or not, you know in your heart. Miss Yan, take care." After saying that, Chu Xiu directly turned and left, leaving Yan Fian looking at his back with a puzzled light in her eyes. By the time Chu Xiu returned, they had already sorted out the remnant 10,000 swords returned to the sect. They gave a copy to Chu Xiu and a copy to Mo Tianlin. Speaking of which, Mo Tianlin was the luckiest. He just came to be a bystander and obtained such a powerful remnant sword technique. Lu Fengxian looked at Chu Xiu in surprise and said, "What did you say to Fian?" Chu Xiu laughed and said, "Nothing much, I'm an acquaintance. I heard that there were some problems in the Yu Nu Palace, So I asked about them recently. Changing the topic, Chu Xiu suddenly said, right, don't let Shui Wuxiang and the others leave you in the future. Of the Yu New Palace. Shui Wuxiang and the others were truly loyal to LV Fengxian. Or it could be said that they weren't loyal to LV Fengxian, but they were loyal to Marquis Wen's inheritance that LV Fengxian possessed. In any case, it didn't matter. Shui Wuxiang and the others were people from the ancient age. Although they had been sealed underground for 10,000 years, they had still lived for such a long time, so they still had some experience. Chu Xiu believed that regarding Yan Fian, Shui Wuxiang and the others should also be able to see that something was wrong, so they also went to warn her. However, with Lu Fengxian's personality, although he looked calm, as long as he made a decision, no one could change it. Therefore, Chu Xiu didn't need to ask to know what was going on. But by bringing Shui Wuxiang and the others with him, if anything happened, they could at least help a little. After chatting with everyone for a while, Chu Xiu directly left with his people, preparing to return to the northern Yan. On the way, Chu Xiu also studied the sword intent inheritance that he had obtained. There were a total of 3 sword intent inheritances, all of which represented the expert's understanding of the sword Dao, and there was no difference in superiority. Among them, the sword intent inheritance that Lu Fengxian had given to Yan Fian represented vitality, while the black sword intent inheritance that Chu Xiu had obtained represented slaughter and death. After all, the sword itself was a weapon, and as long as it was a weapon, it would need to be stained with a fierce and murderous aura in order to grow. The sword intent inheritance that Feng Qishao had obtained was the most interesting. His sword intent inheritance did not have an attribute, but it represented the expert's understanding of the sword Dao source. It could be said that it was the most precious of the 3 sword intent inheritances. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. He took out the heavenly demon dance in his hand, and in an instant, a black force enveloped the entire heavenly demon dance. The black saber chi spread, dancing around Chu Xiu's body. Even among the martial artists that Chu Xiu had brought, there were saber wielders, and the sabers in their hands were constantly trembling, as if they were being triggered by the saber chi. Dispersing the power, Chu Xiu withdrew the heavenly demon dance. Who said that saber wielders could not comprehend the sword intent inheritance? The path of martial Dao had always been different paths leading to the same destination. Chu Xiu knew too many martial Dao, which was why his martial Dao wasn't on the saber, nor on the sword, but on the pursuit of the extremity of martial Dao. After returning to the northern Yan, Chu Xiu asked Mei Qinglian about the situation. During this period of time, the northern Yan martial world could be said to be very peaceful, and there were no incidents. Mei Qinglian extended her hand. Did you get any benefits from the trip to the Azure Water Sword sect? Don't take it all for yourself. Chu Xiu threw the sect origin remnant scroll to her and said, I got the best thing, but it is a pity that it is an inheritance, and I can't give it to others. This is the remnant scroll of Shen Bai's cultivation technique, and it is an extremely strong sword skill. Mei Qinglian took a few glances and threw it to the side. No matter how strong the sword skill was, it didn't interest her much. She wasn't Chu Xiu, and didn't have the energy to cultivate so many complicated cultivation techniques. Mei Qinglian only needed to cultivate the beauty technique to the extreme. As for other things, she didn't have the energy to cultivate the sword Dao. Chu Xiu hadn't completely digested the sword Dao inheritance that the sword Dao expert left behind. This thing had to be comprehended before he could modify it to suit his own martial Dao, which was why it was a waste of time. After arranging everything, Chu Xiu immediately went into seclusion again. Half a month later, before Chu Xiu came out, Zhao Qingping came looking for him, saying that he had something to report. Chu Xiu walked out of the seclusion room and asked, What happened? Zhao Qingping said in a deep voice, It is Xin Changming from the Xin clan. He said he found a person, and it is related to you. Chu Xiu said in surprise, Related to me? Who is it? Zhao Qingping said, It's a disciple from the mortuary manor in the past. He was talking about you outside and was brought here by Shen Changming after he found out. Chu Xiu frowned. It was just such a small matter? Following Nie Renlong's death, the mortuary manor was already destroyed. Even though there were still quite a number of mortuary manor disciples wandering outside, Chu Xiu didn't care. Without Nie Renlong, the mortuary manor was just a plate of loose sand and didn't pose any threat. So if some mortuary manor disciples were to secretly scold him, it actually didn't matter. Shen Changming actually still brought the other party over. It was somewhat making a big fuss over a minor issue. Of course, Chu Xiao couldn't say anything. That would be too much of a blow to the other party's enthusiasm. Therefore, Chu Xiao had no choice but to say, "Bring the other party over." After a moment, Zhao Qingping brought Shen Changming over. After seeing Chu Xiao, Shen Changming immediately bowed and spoke with a slightly flattering tone. "Congratulations to my lord for showing off your prowess in Wei County and obtaining the treasure. Even the 5 major sword sects had to return in defeat under your hands." The incident regarding the Azure Water Sword sect had already spread throughout the pugilistic world. The Azure Water Sword sect had an important treasure, but the 5 major sword sects made a move at the same time. In the end, apart from Feng Qishao who had a good relationship with Chu Xiao and the Yunnu Palace who had the help of Lu Fengxian, the others didn't even get a single bit of benefit. This was somewhat unexpected. Of course, everyone only discussed about this pugilistic world's gossip. After all, it wasn't considered a huge matter. But since Shen Changming was now Chu Xiao's subordinate, he naturally had to pay attention to these matters. Shen Changming's personality was completely different from his elder brother, Shen Chongping, who died in the hands of Yan Bugui. The former had a righteous and unyielding personality, while the latter was very tactful and knew when the wind was blowing. He could be said to be the classic example of shameless. Chu Xiao waved his hand and said, "All right, enough with the compliments. I heard that you captured a person from the Memorial Manor? Did he speak ill of me? If there is such a situation again, you can just ignore it. There are plenty of people in this world who are cursing at me. Chu Xiao. It doesn't matter if he is one more person. As long as he doesn't curse in front of me, then I don't have to bother about it." Shen Changming quickly said, "My lord, this person didn't just curse at you. He even revealed some information. Back when you used the identity of Evil Dao's Lin Yi to kill the Memorial Manor's young manor lord, Nie Renlong once forcefully invited the Northern Yan's divination master, Yuan Ji, to divine your whereabouts. In the end, not only did he divine your whereabouts, but he also divined some other things about your identity. I felt that it might be useful, so I brought him here." Chu Xiao raised his eyebrows. He was very sensitive to the things that had happened to him. Upon hearing this, he immediately said, "Bring that person here." Shen Changming's face immediately lit up when he heard this. He had put in so much effort to bring that person here to claim credit. Now that Chu Xiao wanted to see that person, the credit would definitely be given. After a while, Shen Changming brought a man in his 30s who had the strength of an inborn realm expert. The moment he saw Chu Xiao, the man's eyes immediately revealed a look of horror. His body couldn't help but tremble as he constantly cursed himself in his heart. He was indeed a martial artist of the Memorial Manor and was even a martial artist who served Nie Renlong personally. But now that Nie Renlong was dead and the Memorial Manor had been disbanded, he wasn't loyal to the point where he wanted to take revenge for Nie Renlong. However, he had gone from being the confidant of the Memorial Manor Lord to a rogue cultivator in the pugilistic world. He definitely felt that it was unfair. Therefore, when he mingled with the other rogue cultivators, he would still scold Chu Xiao. One reason was to vent his anger, and the other was to show his identity. Although a fallen phoenix was inferior to a chicken, he was still a disciple of a big sect. Under his deliberate publicity, he actually had some reputation among the rogue cultivators. Because of this, when he was scolding Chu Xiao, he would often brag about the gossip in the memorial hall. Moreover, it was precisely because he had said too much that the Shen family had overheard it and reported it to Shen Zhongming, giving him the opportunity to bring him to Chu Xiao's place. Chapter 700. Chu Xiao indifferently looked at the man and said in a calm voice, "What do you know? Say it, I don't want to waste time." The man trembled as he looked at Chu Xiao. "If I say it, can official Chu spare my life?" Chu Xiao softly said, "First, you don't have the qualifications to discuss conditions with me right now. Second, I don't even want to lie to a person like you. Do you think I will give you any promises? Third, you only need to know that if you don't say it, you will die a very ugly death. That is enough." The man's body turned cold and he did not dare say any more nonsense. He trembled as he said, "When official Chu killed Nie Donglu, the manor master." "Ah no." Therefore, Nie Renlong wanted to search for your whereabouts. Therefore, he forcefully invited Yuan Ji, the master of divination in the land of Northern Yan, to divine your whereabouts. However, there seemed to be a problem during the divination and that Yuan Ji spat out blood on the spot. He even said that you were a person that shouldn't exist. It was very strange. As for the rest, I really don't know. Sir, just treat me like a fart and let me go. The man had a crying face. He was simply scared to death. If he really did something that angered the heavens and people and was killed, it was fine. His life would be worth it. But if he died because of his cheap mouth, he would not be willing even if he went to hell. Chu Xiao knit his brows. What did he mean by a person that shouldn't exist? Where is Yuan Ji right now? The man quickly said. He's in West Chu. That Yuan Ji immediately escaped to West Chu after calculating Sir's whereabouts. Nie Renlong wanted to find him later, but he couldn't find him in the end. Chu Xiao thought about it for a bit. Under the man's eyes that became more and more frightened, Chu Xiao waved his hand and said, "All right, you can leave." The man immediately felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders and hurriedly ran out. After praising Shen Zhongming, Chu Xiao thought about it for a bit. He was prepared to go to West Chu and see Yuan Ji. Chu Xiao had long wanted to study the secrets of his body, but unfortunately, he had no clue. Now that he had finally obtained some clues, Chu Xiao was also prepared to investigate. After telling Mei Qinglian and the others, Chu Xiao headed to West Chu by himself. It wasn't that he didn't want to bring others, but West Chu was not his territory, so there was no meaning in bringing this many people. Moreover, the West Chu land was a bit chaotic and it was too dangerous. If he brought too many people, it would be a burden. In the current Jianghu, the most chaotic place was West Chu. With the rise of moon-worshipping cult, Yi Xiaonan made a high-profile move, defeating the old celestial master of Mount Longhu and Subodhi Monastery's divine monk Rama. Under the premise that Tianmen's gate master Jun Wuxian didn't easily set foot in the Jianghu and the Lord of Freedom god Zhong Shenxiu didn't show his face easily, Yi Xiaonan was the strongest existence in the Jianghu. In order to prevent the demonic path from rising again, forces like the Great Light Temple all headed west to curb the development of moon-worshipping cult. Therefore, the most chaotic place in the Jianghu was West Chu. Experts gathered and the situation was very tense. West Chu's Jiang state capital was only a small state capital. There were no big cities in the entire West Chu. At most it was a small state capital. Jiang state capital was famous because it was close to Mount Longhu, so it was relatively famous. Most of the tourists who came to Mount Longhu or the warriors who came to the Celestial Master Mansion lived in Jiang state capital. However, with Mount Longhu sealed, whether it was the tourists who came to offer incense or the warriors who came to visit, Jiang state capital was no longer as prosperous as before. At this time, in a tavern on the streets of Jiang state capital, a group of Jianghu loose cultivators were taking shelter from the rain and resting. West Chu was humid and rainy. This kind of weather was very common. This group of loose cultivators in the Jianghu naturally did not have masters to supervise their cultivation like the warriors who came from sections. Therefore, they were too lazy to hide at home and cultivate. Instead, they were chatting about Jianghu gossip. Brothers, have you heard? Recently, moon-worshipping cult seems to be fighting with those righteous sects again. I heard that it was quite tragic. Of course I've heard of it. It said that the high priest of the moon-worshipping cult killed a martial Dao grandmaster of the Chunyang Taoist sect with a curse. It was a tragic scene. Before the person could react, he had already become a dried corpse. However, those righteous sects are not to be trifled with. I heard that there is an old ancestor in Storm Sword Tomb who buried his sword with his body. He had originally decided to never come out of Jianghu again and died with the sword. However, at this time, he is carrying a broken sword and has decided to come out of the mountain to exchange a few blows with Yi Xiaonan. It is the same for true martial arts cult. It is said that there is an old ancestor in true martial arts cult who has been instructed by the immortal Ning Xuanji. He is also ready to come out of seclusion. Are you serious? He has been instructed by Ning Xuanji? Isn't this person more than 500 years old? Apart from the old Taoist master, can there be such a senior in Jianghu? Who knows? However, those righteous sects must have extraordinary heritage. I am afraid that our West Chu Wulin will not be peaceful. Who cares? Recently, I have been unlucky. I am going to find Master Yuan Ji and see if I have provoked some dirty things. Master Yuan Ji's asking price is so high. Can you afford it? Hee hee, Recently the Taoist master's mansion has been sealed. There are fewer pilgrims and warriors. Master Yuanji's price is much cheaper than before. Just as they were chatting, a voice suddenly came. Where is the Yuanji you are talking about? As the voice came, everyone present was suddenly shocked. They did not know when a young man in a black robe with a black long saber at his waist stopped outside the tavern and looked at them. It was still raining heavily outside. However, when the raindrops fell on him, they automatically parted. It was as if the raindrops had intelligence and were deliberately avoiding him. The most shocking thing was that there wasn't a shred of aura coming from his body at all. This was what made people feel shocked. Although these Jianghu rogue cultivators were weak, they were not idiots. At a glance, they could tell that this person was an expert among experts. They quickly stood up and said respectfully, Master Yuanji is in the Taoist temple at the foot of Mount Longhu. Sir, do you need me to lead the way? Thank you, but no need. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man in a black robe took a step forward. It was as if he had shrunk the ground to an inch. In an instant, he appeared more than 30 meters away and disappeared in the rain. Everyone present breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. The pressure that such a powerhouse gave them was too great. However, everyone was a little confused. He had such a cultivation at such a young age. He should not be a nobody. Someone suddenly said loudly, I remember. He is Chu Xiao of the Yinma lineage. However, I heard that he is now cooperating with the Northern Yen court and established the martial suppression hall to suppress the Northern Yen martial arts world. Moreover, he has just repelled several major sword sects in Wei County. What is he doing in West Chu? From the top of the Longhu list to the top of the martial list, Chu Xiao was no longer a nobody. In a situation where he did not deliberately hide his appearance, it was normal for him to be recognized. Several people in the tavern looked at each other and shook their heads. These people were more concerned about the Jianghu gossip. They roughly knew the relationship between Chu Xiao's Yinma lineage and the moon-worshipping cult. Therefore, although they were all people of the demonic path, Chu Xiao's demons were different from the moon-worshipping cult's demons. Now that Chu Xiao appeared here, it gave them a feeling that West Chu's Jianghu was more chaotic. Of course, no matter how chaotic it had nothing to do with the lowest-level rogue cultivators in Jianghu. At most, it would give them something to talk about. At this time, Chu Xiao also headed in the direction of Longhu Mountain after getting the exact news from Yuanji. In fact, in the tavern, Chu Xiao appeared after listening to them talking about the Jianghu gossip for a long time. Although Chu Xiao had already inquired about West Chu before coming, the situation in West Chu was constantly changing. The things that Chu Xiao had inquired about were naturally not as clear as the local tyrants in West Chu. He did not expect that the situation in West Chu's Jianghu had become so intense. All the major sects had almost taken out their trump cards. It was as if the second righteous demon war was about to break out. However, this had nothing to do with him. In fact, he still hoped that the moon-worshipping cult could continue to be strong. Without the moon-worshipping cult to attract the firepower on the surface, the martial artists from the Yinma lineage would not be so relaxed. There were many Taoist temples at the foot of Mount Longhu. These Taoist temples did not belong to the Celestial Master Mansion of Mount Longhu, but they were also close to the Taoist sects of the Celestial Master Mansion. Opening a Taoist temple here meant that they were close to the Celestial Master Mansion, and even submitted to the Celestial Master Mansion. Yuanji's Taoist temple was among these Taoist temples and it was very famous. Although his strength was not very good, Yuanji's divination skills were absolutely superb. In Northern Yen, where there were very few Taoist martial artists, he was the #1 divination master. Even if there were countless Taoist martial artists around the Celestial Master Mansion, he was still the same. Even after coming to West Chu, Yuanji had received an invitation from the Celestial Master Manor to exchange insights on the divination technique inside the Celestial Master Manor. Yuanji's Taoist temple did not have a name. There were only 8 words written on the Taoist temple's plaque. 3 days of planning, no mistake. This sentence was extremely arrogant, but it had been hanging for so long without being taken down. This was also his ability. At this time, in the Taoist temple, Yuanji was frowning and drinking tea. It was raining heavily outside and the Celestial Master Mansion had begun to close the mountain. His business was not good. Normally, Yuanji would close the Taoist temple and find his concubines to fool around with. He wanted to see if he could create a villain to break the fate of his lineage of 5 imperfections and 3 imperfections. But today, for some reason, there was always a restless feeling lingering in his heart. He put down the teacup in annoyance and wanted to divine what had happened. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from outside the Taoist temple. Master Yuanji, are you going to divine for yourself to see if there will be a bloody disaster today? Chapter 701. Yuanji really wanted to slap himself right now. He definitely did not look at the almanac when he went out and forgot to read his fortune in the morning. Otherwise, how could he have met Chu Xiu? Yuanji certainly knew Chu Xiu. It should be said that he had a deep impression of him. After all, he had been practicing divination for so many years, but he had never seen someone as strange as Chu Xiu. Everything about him had been forcibly erased. Now that he had fled to West Chu, he did not want to get involved in the mess between him and Nie Renlong. After Nie Renlong died, he had clapped his hands and cheered, but he did not expect another person to come to his door. Stepping into the temple, Chu Xiu said lightly, Master Yuanji, you should recognize me, right? Looking at Chu Xiu, Master Yuanji revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. Official Chu, what happened in the past really has nothing to do with this old man. It was all Nie Renlong who forced me. A knife was placed on my neck, so it did not count. Nie Renlong wanted my life, so I had no choice but to do it. So in the end, I only divined for him once and immediately fled to West Chu. I did not want to help the evildoer again. Chu Xiu said indifferently, but do you know that it was precisely because you revealed my whereabouts that I almost lost my life that time? Yuanji secretly disdained him in his heart. Who are you trying to fool? Although he was no longer in the northern Yan kingdom at that time, he knew that Chu Xiu had been on a killing spree during that battle. He had directly defeated a group of warriors who had come to kill him and left the northern Yan kingdom calmly. However, although he thought this in his heart, Master Yuanji put on a cowardly expression and begged, Official Chu, I really had no choice. People in the pugilistic world cannot help themselves. If I did not do this, that hypocrite Nie Renlong would not only kill me, he would also kill my whole family. Your whole family refers to your dozens of concubines? Yuanji smiled awkwardly. However, he could also see that Chu Xiu wouldn't kill him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be talking nonsense with him here. He would have just killed him with a knife. So Yuanji directly said, Official Chu, just say what you want. As long as this old man can do it, I will not refuse. Chu Xiu was a little surprised and said, You are quite self-aware. Yuanji forced a smile and said, People like us who practice divination believe in karma the most. Today's karma will be the result of karma in the future. I've been prepared for this day ever since I helped Nie Renlong calculate Lord Chu's whereabouts. In the past, as long as I calculated something that had a big impact, I would deliberately ignore it. I was afraid that I would be contaminated by karma. But today's matter cannot be avoided. Instead of struggling, it is better to bear it. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, You are very open-minded. I just want to ask you one thing. I heard that when you helped Nie Renlong calculate me, you said that I did not exist. What is going on? Yuanji was stunned and said, I saw a big hand erase everything about you, Official Chu. But wasn't that done by the experts of your Yinma clan? Chu Xiu frowned and said, Done by the experts of the Yinma clan? What do you mean? Yuanji said, The scene that I predicted in the past was indeed a little strange. But after I learned about Official Chu's two identities, I guessed that the experts of the Yinma clan erased everything about you in order to hide your identity. It was to prevent a divination master like me from deducing your identity. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, No one did that. And how strong is the expert who can hide the secret of heaven? Yuanji hesitated and said, No one did that? To be honest, I have never seen an expert of this level. But according to my thinking, if one can reach the level of Yi Xiaonan of the moon-worshipping sect, he should be able to do this. Chu Xiu glanced at Yuanji and said, If the Yinma clan had an expert comparable to Yi Xiaonan, would it still be called the Yinma clan? After thinking for a while, Chu Xiu said, If I were to let you deduce something about me again, would you be able to deduce anything else? Yuanji's face turned pale when he heard that. He quickly shook his head and said, The expert who concealed the heavenly secrets was too powerful. He was so powerful that I had to recuperate for several months after suffering a backlash. Chu Xiu said faintly, Oh, then do you want to recuperate for a longer time? Yuanji immediately sat up straight and said, "Sir, please wait for a moment. I'll start the deduction right away." As he said that, Yuanji performed hand seals and waves of mysterious aura emitted from his body. The power was similar to Chu Xiu's heaven sun gazing at air, but it was not. Amidst the fake and blurry secret of heaven, Yuanji saw that huge hand again. It was a huge hand that could wipe out everything. He suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and his face turned extremely pale. Yuanji laughed bitterly and said helplessly, "Official Chu, the result is still the same. As long as I calculate everything about you, I'll definitely suffer a backlash." Chu Xiu threw a bottle of medicinal pills to Yuanji and frowned, wondering if he should tell Yuanji some of the more secretive things. Although Yuanji was not the top existence in the pugilistic world when it came to divination, he was considered first-rate. The remaining top existences could only be existences at the level of the Great Light Temple's Karma Meditation Hall, Su Jing. With Chu Xiu's current strength, he was the only one who could help him clear up his doubts. However, these things were related to Chu Xiu's deepest secrets. Even if he told him in a tactful way and did not mention things like transmigration, it would still be shocking enough. So after he told him, should he kill him to keep him quiet? On the other side, Yuanji swallowed an elixir and suddenly shivered. He happened to meet Chu Xiu's ferocious gaze. He couldn't help but shiver, feeling extremely nervous. After a while, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Master Yuanji, you're from the Northern Yan?" Yuanji was stunned and said, "Yes." Chu Xiu said calmly, "Being forced to leave my hometown is actually a very helpless thing. How can the outside world be as good as my hometown? Now that Nie Renlong, who forced you to leave the Northern Yan, is dead, Master Yuanji, you can return to the Northern Yan. You don't have to worry about anything else." Yuanji waved his hand indifferently and said, "It doesn't matter. I have been staying in West Chu for a long time." Before Yuanji could finish his words, he met Chu Xiu's cold gaze. He swallowed the last word he wanted to say. Chu Xiu said directly, "I won't keep you in suspense. Master Yuanji, there are some secret matters that I need to ask you. However, because it is too secret, I'm afraid that you can't keep it a secret. After all, only the dead can keep secrets. I am actually a very reasonable person. If you help me, I can't bear to kill you, so you can directly join my Jinwu Hall. The treatment will not be worse than what you received in West Chu. You can be at ease under my watch and I can also be at ease." Hearing this, Yuanji's expression suddenly changed. To be honest, he really did not want to have anything to do with Chu Xiu. What kind of person was Chu Xiu? He was a famous evil villain in the underworld. He was the heir of the Yinma bloodline. In the future, he would definitely be at the level of a devil. Yuanji had also heard about the Zhenwu Hall that he established with the Northern Yan Imperial Court. It was also notorious in the Northern Yan underworld and was despised by the Northern Yan martial arts world. Although Yuanji was not in the martial arts world now, it did not mean that he was willing to mix with the evil. However, Master Yuanji did not dare to refuse. Chu Xiu's hand had never left the heavenly demon dance on his waist. Just when Master Yuanji had accepted his fate and was about to agree, a cold snort suddenly came from outside. "Brother Yuanji, don't worry. No one can take you away from my Longhu Mountain." Hearing this voice, Yuanji's expression was happy at first, and then it changed. He knew the person who came. It was his good friend from the Taoist master's mansion. But the problem was that now he was ready to accept his fate. "Wasn't it a little late for you to come?" Therefore, Yuanji did not say anything. He just quietly shrank in the corner to see the result. A middle-aged Taoist in a white robe stepped into the Taoist temple and looked at Chu Xiu with an angry face. The Taoist master's mansion had sealed the mountain, but it did not mean that a Taoist was really not allowed to leave the Taoist master's mansion. Therefore, some Taoist would still leave the Taoist master's mansion to buy some food and other things at the foot of Longhu Mountain, and transport them to the Taoist master's mansion. This Taoist was Zhang Chuanzong, the deacon of the Taoist master's mansion. He was not a direct descendant of the Zhang family, but he was also a martial Dao Grand Master of the Taoist master's mansion. Recently, he was responsible for bringing disciples down the mountain to buy some food and other things. Yuanji and Zhang Chuanzong had been good friends since before he was a martial Dao Grand Master. Therefore, he could not stay in the Northern Yan, so he immediately came to Zhang Chuanzong to seek shelter. Zhang Chuanzong was also very kind and directly helped him build a Taoist temple at the foot of Longhu Mountain. With the protection of the Taoist master's mansion, Yuan Ji lived a comfortable life. This time, Zhang Chuanzong took his disciples down the mountain to buy things. As a martial Dao grandmaster, of course, he would not be responsible for these things. He just went down the mountain. He was bored staying on the mountain, so he went to find Yuan Ji to play chess. He did not expect to encounter such a scene. Zhang Chuanzong looked at Chu Xiao and snorted, "Chu Xiao, I know that you have recently become famous in Jianghu, but don't forget where you are. Even if the Taoist master's mansion has sealed the mountain at this time, it is not a place where you can act wildly." Chu Xiao held the hilt of the sword with his right hand and said lightly, "What a joke. Master Yuan Ji is not a member of your Taoist master's mansion. He is a Northern Yan man. Now I want to take him back. Is there a problem? Is this my problem, or is your Taoist master's mansion too overbearing?" Zhang Chuanzong looked at Master Yuan Ji. At this time, Master Yuan Ji did not dare to say a word, looking innocent. Zhang Chuanzong looked at Chu Xiao and said coldly, "Are you taking him or taking him away?" "I still say the same thing. The Taoist master's mansion is not a place where you, Chu Xiao, can act wildly." Chu Xiao held the hilt of the sword and said in a deep voice, "What if I insist on taking him away? If you want to stop me, ask Zhang Qingzhen to come. I'm afraid you are not qualified." Chapter 702. Most of the Taoist priests of Longhu Mountain had good tempers, which was also related to the temper of the old Celestial Master. Although the old Celestial Master was powerful, he kept a low profile, so the disciples of Longhu Mountain were the same. However, Zhang Chuanzong was very angry now. He was so angry that he almost lost his mind. However, it was not only because of Chu Xiao, but also because of the moon-worshipping sect. Since the disappearance of the true martial sects Ning Xuanji, the Celestial Master Mansion had become the leader of the three great Taoist sects. Especially later on, almost all the powerhouses of the same era as the old Celestial Master were dead. The old Celestial Master was also ranked in the top 5 of the sovereign list, becoming one of the strongest in the world. With such strength, the Celestial Master Mansion already had the strength to become the supreme of the martial arts world. However, the Celestial Master Mansion was willing to keep a low profile, but its disciples also had a trace of arrogance. As a result, Yi Xiaonan's matter slapped the Celestial Master Mansion in the face. He defeated the old Celestial Master in public and forced the Celestial Master Mansion to seal their mountain for a year. This was definitely a humiliation for the Celestial Master Mansion. A great humiliation. The Celestial Master Mansion was a bit like a sect and also like a family. However, under the leadership of the old Celestial Master, the entire Celestial Master Mansion shared honor and disgrace. The Celestial Master Mansion's humiliation was their own humiliation. Yi Xiaonan relied on his strength to fight his way to the door. Chu Xiao was just a junior in the pugilistic world. Although he had some fame in the pugilistic world, he dared to be presumptuous in the Celestial Master Mansion. What right did he have? Zhang Chuanzong saw that Chu Xiao's hand was already on the hilt of the saber, but he did not retreat at all. He also held a long sword with thunder patterns in his hand. His whole body was filled with lightning. When the sword fell, the momentum of the sword was like rushing thunder, bringing a thunderous explosion. Even the power of the thunder in the heavy rain outside the Taoist temple was attracted by him. It turned into a thunder snake sword dance, slashing toward Chu Xiao. Yuan Ji saw that Zhang Chuanzong was so impulsive. He wanted to stop him, but it was too late. After all, the West Chu forces did not know Chu Xiao very well. First, Chu had stayed in West Chu for very little time. It should be said that he had only been here twice. The second was when Chu Xiao became famous. There were basically no West Chu powers that participated. However, in both the Eastern Qi and Northern Yan regions, Chu Xiao could be said to be fearsome. Despite his young age, he was definitely on par with the older generation of martial arts grandmasters. Although Zhang Chuanzong was also a martial arts grandmaster, Yuan Ji knew that his good friend was not considered outstanding in the Celestial Master Mansion. He was not as good as Zhang Daoling, who was in charge of the Celestial Master Mansion, or Zhang Xiling, who was copying books in the Golden Light Pavilion. What was more, he was not as good as Xian Longzi, the god of thunder, who was crazy but extremely talented. If it were those people above them, they might be able to restrain Chu Xiu, but as for Zhang Chuanzong, he was not just a little bit weaker. At the moment when Zhang Chuanzong swung his sword, Chu Xiu also made his move. His hand, which held the saber, instantly turned pitch black. Pure demonic qi stirred up the deathly aura and baleful aura, condensing into a saber light that was over 100 feet long and attached to the heavenly demon dance. As Chu Xiu slashed out with his saber, all the light in the entire Taoist temple was devoured. It was an evil saber that was condensed from extreme darkness and extreme negative emotions. Chu Xiu's heavenly demon dance was originally a demonic blade. In the past, when Chu Xiu attacked, he integrated the blood-refined god gang into it with a strong evil qi. Later, Chu Xiu mastered the 7 demon blades and integrated the hatred of the hate blade into it. In Wei County, Chu Xiu also received the sword essence inheritance of the death qi and killing qi. Although he did not know sword techniques, he integrated it into his own blade techniques. Therefore, when Chu Xiu swung his blade, it seemed simple, but the power of integration and change in it was shocking. As the blade fell, Zhang Chuanzong's sword light and thundersnake were all swallowed up. He also felt an extremely dark power coming, causing a crack to appear on the long sword in his hand. Zhang Chuanzong quickly retreated and decisively gave up the long sword in his hand. He pinched the thunder seal in his hand, and in an instant, endless thunder light blocked in front of him. Only then did he completely block the power of Chu Xiu's blade. At the same time, Zhang Chuanzong's eyes showed a trace of horror. Is Chu Xiu really that strong? Zhang Chuanzong was indeed not ranked in the Celestial Master Mansion. However, he was still a martial Dao master. As a martial Dao master from the Celestial Master Mansion, his strength and status were originally higher than ordinary martial Dao masters. However, in the face of Chu Xiu, he only used one move and Chu Xiu made him feel a sense of powerlessness. This young man's strength is probably on par with Zhang Qingzhen. However, this thought only flashed through Zhang Chuanzong's mind, and he immediately erased it. Zhang Qingzhen was the future of the Celestial Master Mansion. He was the pride of the Celestial Master Mansion. He was unique, and no one could compare with him, not even Chu Xiu. Zhang Chuanzong gritted his teeth and shouted angrily. The lightning patterns in his hands flashed, attracting the green lightning in the air into his body. His entire person seemed to have descended from the thunder god as he attacked Chu Xiu. In fact, he could escape. This was Mount Longhu, the Celestial Master Mansion. As long as he escaped up the mountain, there would be countless reinforcements. Not to mention Chu Xiu, even Wei Shuya would not be able to kill him. However, as a disciple of the Celestial Master Mansion, he could not escape. Facing a junior like Chu Xiu, choosing to escape would mean that he had humiliated the Celestial Master Mansion. He could die, but the dignity of the Celestial Master Mansion could not be lost. Chu Xiu looked at Zhang Chuanzong in surprise. Is this person really not afraid of death, or does he have some trump card? At this time, Yuan Ji shouted anxiously behind Chu Xiu. Official Chu. Please let him go this time. I'm willing to cooperate with Official Chu to deduce everything. Yuan Ji was actually a very slippery and timid person, and he was also a little selfish. However, when he came to West Chu, Zhang Chuanzong did not say anything and directly received him. He even put in a lot of effort for him to establish a foothold in West Chu, which made Yuan Ji feel a little touched. At this time, Zhang Chuanzong was also helping him, so he naturally could not watch Zhang Chuanzong die in the hands of Chu Xiu. It was unknown whether Chu Xiu heard Yuan Ji's words or not, but when he attacked again, he had already put away the sky demon dance in his hand. He also made a seal with his hand, but he made a Buddhist seal, the colorless sealing palm print. Everything in the world was crushed in front of the colorless sealing palm print. The lightning fell, and Zhang Chuanzong spat out a mouthful of blood and took a few steps back. Chu Xiu's expression was cold, and the power of his spirit condensed into an arrow. The soul-destroying arrow burst out, whistling silently towards Zhang Chuanzong. Even if this arrow did not kill Zhang Chuanzong, it would severely injure his spirit. The soul-destroying arrow was originally one of the 9 major techniques of soul capturing. In fact, Chu Xiu did not use this technique often in the beginning, because it consumed too much energy. However, in the later stages, Chu Xiu's spiritual strength increased greatly. Coupled with the use of the heaven sun gazing at air, the power of this soul-destroying arrow doubled, and the arrow almost always hit its target. Zhang Chuanzong looked at the soul-destroying arrow in front of him in horror. The power that locked onto him made Zhang Chuanzong understand that no matter how he dodged, he could not avoid this arrow. There were countless cultivation methods and secret manuals in the Celestial Master Abode. The Celestial Master Abode had secret manuals that could resist soul-destroying secret techniques, but Zhang Chuanzong did not cultivate them. Just as Zhang Chuanzong was about to burn his essence blood to block Chu Xiu's arrow, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Zhang Chuanzong. The figure extended a finger, and lightning immediately bloomed. The scorching lightning contained the power to suppress demons and destroy evil, directly shattering the soul-destroying arrow. This person was wearing a white Taoist robe and had a handsome appearance. His eyes were faintly emitting lightning. The person who appeared in front of Zhang Chuanzong was Zhang Qingzhen. Zhang Chuanzong looked at Zhang Qingzhen blankly and said with some shame, "Qingzhen." He was Zhang Qingzhen's senior, so he should have sheltered him. However, he had been saved by Zhang Qingzhen, which made Zhang Chuanzong feel rather embarrassed. Zhang Qingzhen shook his head and said, "You don't have to say anything, Uncle Master. They're still waiting for you to bring food back to the mountain. Otherwise, dinner will be late. Just leave this to me." Zhang Chuanzong wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. He just shook his head and retreated, but he did not leave. It was embarrassing enough that he was saved by Zhang Qingzhen. How could he just watch Zhang Qingzhen fight alone here? Looking at Chu Xiu, Zhang Qingzhen said calmly, "Brother Chu, we meet again. I haven't congratulated you on becoming a martial Dao master." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I would accept other people's congratulations, but for you, Zhang Qingzhen, to say such words, it has some meaning of ridicule. Even if I've become a martial Dao master, I'm a step slower than you, so there's nothing to congratulate me about. This is the territory of your Celestial Master Mansion. Are you here to stop me?" Zhang Qingzhen shook his head and said, "The old Celestial Master said that the Celestial Master Mansion will not bully anyone, but we can't be bullied. You wanted to take Yuan Ji away, so long as he agreed. However, you shouldn't have hurt Uncle Master Chuanzong." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "But if your Uncle Master didn't stop me, I wouldn't have hurt him." Zhang Qingzhen also shook his head and said, "That's why the old Celestial Master also said that there's not much reason to talk about in Jianghu. Maybe everyone is right and everyone is wrong. At this time, try not to talk nonsense if you can fight. Winning is right, and losing is wrong." Chu Xiu nodded in understanding and said, "The old Celestial Master is a sensible person." As soon as he said that, the heavenly demon dance in Chu Xiu's hand had already slashed out with a monstrous demonic aura. The death intent and demonic aura turned into a sharp blade, and the power of the slash was terrifying. There was even a faint ghostly wailing phenomenon. The slash already had the ultimate power to affect heaven and earth, drawing upon the negative energy between heaven and earth. A long sword also appeared in Zhang Qingzhen's hand. It was a pitch-black long sword that emitted an extremely evil aura. However, it was covered with lightning patterns, completely suppressing the evil aura. This was the divine weapon of Mount Longhu, evil slaying. It had been prepared for Zhang Qingzhen since the day he was born. Legend had it that evil slaying was a murderous weapon, but it was subdued and suppressed by the ancestors of the Celestial Master Mansion with great power, turning into a divine weapon that could only be controlled by the martial artists of the Celestial Master Mansion with thunder. Evil slaying stabbed out, and when the saber and sword collided, lightning and demonic aura tore apart and surged. With a loud bang, the Taoist temple where Yuan Ji was completely shattered. Chapter 703. Facing Zhang Qingzhen, Chu Xiu's fighting spirit was still very high. Back in Xiaofan heaven, Zhang Qingzhen fought against 5 people alone and stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. It could be said that he used Chu Xiu and the others as stepping stones. However, Chu Xiu did not use his full strength at that time. At that time, his identity had not been exposed, and he could not use some demonic techniques. Now that Chu Xiu could show his full strength, and he had also stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm, the gap between him and Zhang Qingzhen had narrowed again. He did not think that he would lose this time. Whether it was Zhang Qingzhen or Chu Xiu, their strength could no longer be judged by common sense. After a single exchange, the Taoist temple where Yuan Ji was directly destroyed by them. At the same time, the the Taoist priests in the other Taoist temples also gathered around to watch. These Taoist priests were some rogue cultivators attached to Mount Longhu. They had some strength, so they built Taoist temples at the foot of Mount Longhu to share some incense. As long as these Taoist priests were obedient, the Taoist mansion would not care about them. Anyway, to the Taoist mansion, they were not short of incense. If someone came to provoke them under normal circumstances, the Taoist mansion would not need to do anything, and they would fight to get rid of the person. However, now that they knew that the other party was Chu Xiu, no one dared to make a move. Before Zhang Qingjin came, Chu Xiu and Zhang Quanzong caused a huge commotion when they fought. In the end, they did not even have the chance to watch the show. They only showed up when Zhang Qingjin appeared. However, they were just watching the show and would not be stupid enough to get involved in such a matter. When the smoke and dust dispersed, Chu Xiu and Zhang Qingjin stood in the same place, but there were ruins around them. With the two of them at the center, the ground had cracked inch by inch, looking extremely terrifying. Everyone present sucked in a breath of cold air. To be honest, they did not think it was an exaggeration for Zhang Qingjin to have such strength. What shocked them was that Chu Xiu also had such strength, which was a little beyond their expectations. At this time, standing in the ruins, Chu Xiu's heavenly fiend dance stopped, and the demonic flames around him soared into the sky as he attacked again. The momentum of the saber was violent, and every slash carried a shocking death intent and demonic aura. Although the evil slayer in Zhang Qingjin's hand also exuded an awe-inspiring evil aura, the lightning patterns on it actually had the power to suppress demons. The sword was unsheathed, and thunder flashed. Amidst the endless explosions of lightning, the saber and sword clashed. For a moment, the two were actually evenly matched. However, at this moment, Zhang Qingjin's right hand unsheathed his sword. His left hand formed a seal, and the 5 thunder execution was thrown out. Moreover, it wasn't just one 5 thunder execution, but dozens of them. The powerful force of thunder affected heaven and earth, and within a radius of 100 feet, the chi of heaven and earth was sucked dry, turning into a boundless lightning prison. This was the power of the golden thunderclap core, which could transform any power between heaven and earth into the power of thunder. Although Zhang Qingjin had just stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm not long ago, his strength had already far surpassed 90% of martial Dao Grandmasters. Zhang Quanzong, who was watching the battle from the side, could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. As expected, Qingjin was reliable. No matter how arrogant Chu Xiu was, he should have been defeated by now, right? However, as soon as Zhang Quanzong finished speaking, he saw a demonic figure wrapped in terrifying demonic aura like a sharp blade, directly slashing the boundless lightning prison. Zhang Qingjin had the golden thunderclap core, and Chu Xiu also had the invincible demon core with him. The huge lightning around him blasted Chu Xiu's body. The feeling was indeed unpleasant, but the invincible demon core in his body was spinning wildly, absorbing the remaining chi of heaven and earth around him. It could even directly absorb the power of the lightning and transform it into demonic aura to protect his body. Even if Chu Xiu's internal organs were blasted to the extent that they were shattered, the invincible demon core could still transform the power and quickly heal him. Therefore, at the moment, although Chu Xiu's face was pale, the demonic aura around him was condensed to the extreme. When the blade slashed down, it could shake mountains and split seas. The power of the 7 great limits directly tore the boundless lightning prison apart. The power of this move was too shocking. Even with Zhang Qingjin's current strength, he did not dare to take it head-on. Therefore, he formed a seal with his hand, and the divine figure of the 9 heavens responding Yuan Thunder Sound Celestial Lord appeared behind him. He held lightning talismans in his hand, and one after another, lightning talismans appeared in front of Chu Xiu. However, they were all shattered by his extremely domineering blade. However, Zhang Qingjin's inner force cultivation was not weak. He was a person without any weaknesses. Just by relying on the densely packed lightning talismans, he was able to withstand Chu Xiu's attacks. Zhang Qingjin did not believe that Chu Xiu would be able to maintain such a powerful strength for a long time. Sure enough, although Zhang Qingjin's densely packed lightning talismans were unable to block Chu Xiu's sea-cleaving slash, they were able to continuously deplete Chu Xiu's power to the point where he could withstand it. Not far from where Chu Xiu and the others were fighting, another group of people was also walking towards the foot of Longhu Mountain. The group of people was dressed very strangely. One of them was a woman riding on a black panther. She was dressed in white and wore a veil. It was the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult. Beside her were a few warriors dressed in Miao territory clothing. Yi Tianxia of the evil pole sect was also following her. Yi Tianxia was actually a little depressed as he carried his blood dragon spear. Although he did not like to be in the limelight, he did not like to run around behind a woman. However, moon-worshipping cult had become the #1 demonic sect, at least for the entire bright demon lineage. As a sect of the bright demon lineage, the evil pole sect would definitely follow moon-worshipping cult's lead. Therefore, during this period of time, although all the righteous sects had gathered in West Chu to attack moon-worshipping cult, many demonic sects like the bright demon lineage had also gathered in West Chu. Yi Tianxia following the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult was also an order from the evil pole sect. In other words, it was to cultivate the relationship between the two young people. In the future, when Yi Tianxia took charge of the evil pole sect, the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult would also grow up and become a true core figure of moon-worshipping cult. There was no harm in having a good relationship between the two sides. Even the evil pole sect had another idea, which was to form a marriage alliance with moon-worshipping cult. However, even the sect master of evil pole sect did not mention this idea to the outside world. In the past, none of the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult had been able to get married. This matter was just something he thought about himself. Following behind the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult, Yi Tianxia saw that the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult had not done anything serious for a long time. He could not help but mutter, "Holy maiden, is it meaningful for us to spend so much effort to find a guy who was driven out of northern Yen by Nianrenlong? It's better to go to the battlefield and fight a few rounds." The holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult glanced at him and snorted, "What do you know? Su Jing of the Karma Meditation Hall of the Great Light Temple is too terrifying in karma deduction. Even the high priest is not his opponent. If we don't find a few more people who are good at divination as soon as possible, moon-worshipping cult will suffer even more." Although Yuan Ji was scared away by Nianrenlong, he is known as the best fortune-teller in northern Yen. Even in the entire Dao sect, although his attainments in divination are not as good as the top few, he is still first class. Yi Tianxia said, "If that's the case, why don't we find the top ones? Why waste our effort to find this guy? No matter how strong he is no match for Su Jing." The holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult stroked the black panther she was sitting on and said lightly, "There are only a few top divination masters who are rogue cultivators. Even if there are, their strength is extremely strong and their relationships are extremely complicated. We can't invite such people. It's better for the sect master to do it himself. But Yuan Ji is no match for them. However, one more person can at least reverse the situation. At worst, we can find a few more people like Yuan Ji." Just as the two were talking, waves of fighting came from afar. There was the familiar demonic energy of the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult and Yi Tianxia, as well as the power of thunder. The holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult murmured, "It's Zhang Qingzhen. Didn't the celestial master abode say that they have sealed the mountain? Who is he fighting with?" As soon as her voice fell, the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult immediately led her people forward. At this time, the place where Chu Xiao and Zhang Qingzhen fought was already a mess. The ground under their feet was directly torn by the powerful Gang Qi, blasting out a large pit with a radius of hundreds of feet and a depth of tens of feet. Both of them were going all out. Chu Xiao had even used his 7 limits, while Zhang Qingzhen had also used the might of his 9 heavens responding origin thunderclap heavenly lord of universal transformations Dharma idol to its limits. However, at this time, both sides still had strength to spare. Between the two of them, one had condensed the golden core of thunder, and the other had condensed the immortal demon core. Even if it was a battle of this level, they could still hold on. Since he couldn't decide the outcome of the battle even with his full strength, if he really wanted to decide the outcome of the battle, then he would have to take out his trump card. Zhang Qingzhen looked at Chu Xiao and suddenly shook his head. "I always thought that my final opponent would be Zhong Xian, but I didn't expect it to be you. You cultivate the methods of Taoism, Buddhism, and demon at the same time. At this time, I'm afraid you still have a trump card." Chu Xiao said lightly, "Aren't you the same? The golden core of thunder of celestial master abode should have more than this effect and power. The real power of the immortal demon core could only be exerted when fighting with one's life, and the effect of the golden core of thunder was not as simple as simply absorbing more chi of heaven and earth and transforming it into the power of thunder." However, whether it was Chu Xiao or Zhang Qingzhen, they both knew that if they continued to fight, It would not be a victory or defeat, but a battle of life and death. At this moment, a pleasant voice suddenly sounded. It's a pity that I didn't get to see the fierce battle between the two heroes who used to be ranked first on the Longhu list. Why don't you guys fight again? Chu Xiao and Zhang Qingzhen looked back and saw that the saintess of the moon-worshipping cult was looking at them with her people. Yi Tianxia looked at Chu Xiao with a complicated expression. There was unwillingness and dissatisfaction in his eyes. In the past, he had been defeated by Chu Xiao, but at that time, Chu Xiao had appeared as Lin Yi. Since then, Yi Tianxia had returned to the extreme evil sect to cultivate hard and desperately. By the time he broke through to the unity of heaven and man realm and was ready to find Lin Yi for revenge, Lin Yi had already become Chu Xiao and fought alone in the orthodox pugilistic world, becoming famous in the pugilistic world. The gap was so big that it made him despair. Chapter 704. The moon-worshipping cult saintess came at the right time. As soon as she appeared, Chu Xiao and Zhang Qingzhen had a way out of this embarrassing situation. Zhang Qingzhen said, "Your moon-worshipping cult has been high-profile enough. My celestial master mansion has sealed itself off for a year. What are you here for?" The holy maiden chuckled. "If your celestial master mansion really sealed itself off, what are you doing now? Don't worry. I'm not here to look for trouble. I'm just looking for someone. It has nothing to do with Longhu Mountain." Who? The holy maiden looked at Master Yuanji, who was shivering in the corner, and said, "Him." The three parties turned their attention to Master Yuanji at the same time. He was at a loss and panicked. Chu Xiao of the Lurking Demons, the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult, and the little celestial master Zhang Qingzhen were the most outstanding successors of the righteous, bright demons, and lurking demons. But now, all three parties were looking for him. Master Yuanji didn't know when he had become so popular. Chu Xiao said, "What a coincidence. I'm also here to look for Master Yuanji to return to Northern Yen." "You're late, holy maiden." The holy maiden chuckled. "Western Chu is a beautiful place. Why would I return to Northern Yen? There's no first come, first served." Zhang Qingzhen said solemnly, "Grandmaster Yuanji is a friend of the Celestial Master Abode. It's up to him to decide where he wants to go. If he wants to stay on Longhu Mountain, no one can take him away today." The pressure from the three parties was on Master Yuanji, and he almost collapsed. Chu Xiao said, "Master Yuanji, it's your turn to choose. Tell me, do you want to return to Northern Yen or stay on Longhu Mountain?" Master Yuanji's face was full of worry. In the end, he could only bow to Zhang Qingzhen and say in an apologetic tone, "Thank you for your kindness, little celestial master, but I am not a person of West Chu. I will have to leave sooner or later." Among the three of them, the only one that Master Yuanji could afford to offend was actually Zhang Qingzhen. It was not because Zhang Qingzhen was weak, but because of Zhang Qingzhen's identity. If he dared to refuse Chu Xiao's offer, he was sure that he would be able to return to Northern Yen today. Of course, he wouldn't be going back to Northern Yen. If he were to offend the holy maiden of the moon-worshipping cult, he would not want to experience the extremely sinister witchcraft of the moon-worshipping cult. Compared to these two people, Zhang Qingzhen was, after all, from the Celestial Master Mansion, a righteous sect. They would not make things difficult for a small character like him. Moreover, compared to Chu Xiao and the holy maiden of the moon-worshipping cult, Zhang Qingzhen had a good reputation in the pugilistic world. He rarely made things difficult for others. He could not afford to offend a bad person, so he could only offend a good person like Zhang Qingzhen. Zhang Qingzhen looked deeply at Master Yuanji, then turned his eyes to Chu Xiao and the holy maiden of the moon-worshipping cult. He said calmly, "All right, the Celestial Master Mansion will not interfere in this matter. However, this is Longhu Mountain after all. If you cause a big commotion, don't blame the Celestial Master Mansion for meddling." Zhang Qingzhen wanted to retreat, but Zhang Chuanzong glared at Yuanji and said angrily, "Yuanji, I didn't expect you to be this kind of person. I spent so much effort to help you establish yourself on Longhu Mountain, but I didn't expect that I would help a cowardly rat who is afraid of death." Yuanji bowed to Zhang Chuanzong guiltily. He had indeed let down this old friend of his. However, he only had one life, and he could not do anything for his friend. The most he could do was not stab his friend in the back at the critical moment. Zhang Qingjin said lightly. All right, Uncle Master, everyone has their own fate. Let's go back to the mountain, or the others will really have to starve. Zhang Chuanzong snorted coldly and left with Zhang Qingjin. The holy maiden of the moon-worshipping cult looked at Chu Xiao and said with a smile, Official Chu, how about giving Master Yuanji to me? You are a man, so you can't snatch him from a weak woman like me, right? Chu Xiao shook his head and said, Master Yuanji is also very important to me. I can't give up this person. Moreover, the holy maiden of the moon-worshipping cult has never been a weak woman. If you are a weak woman, then what about those who died under your Gu technique? The holy maiden shook her head unhappily and said, Men who don't know how to flirt are so annoying. Let's put it another way. Now our moon-worshipping cult is under the pressure of the righteous sections. Without the moon-worshipping cult, can you, Chu Xiao, be so arrogant in the northern Yan? Ming Mo and Yin Mo are both demons. If you let me go this time, our moon-worshipping cult can face the righteous sects more easily. Isn't it good to be convenient for others? Chu Xiao shook his head again and said, If it were anything else, I would let you go, but I will never let Master Yuanji go. Had the saintess ever heard of such a saying? If you want to wear the crown, you must bear its weight. It is not easy for the moon-worshipping cult to be the #1 demonic sect. Of course, if the moon-worshipping cult doesn't want it, you can give it to us. We won't mind. The holy maiden sighed and said, So there's no room for negotiation? Chu Xiao nodded. The holy maiden sighed again and said, Women are usually unreasonable. The more beautiful they are, the more they are. A beautiful woman like me rarely talks reason with others. It's not easy for me to reason with you, but you don't listen. It seems that I was wrong. A beautiful woman like me is not suitable to reason with others. It's more suitable to kill. As soon as she said that, Chu Xiao's feet suddenly moved. As if the earth was trembling, countless Gu insects rose from Chu Xiao's feet. They were of different colors and densely packed. They all rushed towards Chu Xiao. Even Chu Xiao was a little surprised by this scene. He really didn't notice that there were so many Gu insects under his feet. The holy maiden's cultivation had not reached the realm of martial Dao Grandmaster. She had just reached the realm of oneness of heaven and man. However, with so many Gu insects on her body, not to mention oneness of heaven and man, even martial Dao Grandmasters had suffered from her in the Battle of Mount Fuyu in the past. Chu Xiao pinched the Buddha's seal with his hand, and in an instant, the 9 seals merged into one. The 9 words formula of fast and slow was displayed one after another. The Buddha light around him kept spinning like a roulette. As Chu Xiao blasted out each seal, a large number of Gu insects were forcibly turned into a pile of meat paste by him. The saintess of the moon-worshipping cult frowned deeply. Her venomous insects had no effect on Chu Xiao at all. It was as if they had been sent to their deaths. Even when they were in front of Chu Xiao, they felt a strange sense of fear. If she had not forcefully used the secret method to control the venomous insects, these venomous insects would not have been able to move forward. These densely packed Gu insects were cultivated in batches by her secret method. Even if they were all killed by Chu Xiao, she would not feel the pinch. However, the problem was that so many Gu insects had died, but in the end, they did not even touch Chu Xiao. This was too silly. Moon-worshipping sect saintess didn't think about the glazed gold thread Gu because the glazed gold thread Gu was something that happened 20 years ago. At that time, moon-worshipping sect saintess was just a little girl and hadn't joined moon-worshipping sect yet. Moreover, so many years had passed. Other than the moon-worshipping sect's martial artists who had participated in that battle, if others wanted to know about the glazed gold silk Gu, they could only find it in the various ancient books of the moon-worshipping sect. Therefore, the moon-worshipping cult saintess did not suspect that Chu Xiao had a paragon Gu worm refined by the moon-worshipping cult. She only thought that it was because Chu Xiao had a Buddhist cultivation technique, so he was more restrained against Gu worms. The technique of refining Gu was also an evil technique, so it was normal for it to be restrained by Buddhist martial arts. With a wave of her hand, the 2 golden phantoms in the hands of the holy maiden disappeared instantly. When they appeared again, they had already arrived in front of Chu Xiao. The 2 golden phantoms turned out to be 2 very strange Gu insects. They looked like cicadas, but they had sickle forelegs like a praying mantis. The cicada wings behind them were also abnormally wide, with complex and magnificent patterns on them. These goo insects were the strongest goo insects refined by the Holy Maiden using the moon-worshipping sect's secret method of refining goo. They were called the yearning intestines goo. This kind of goo insect needed a drop of blood from 99 pairs of loved ones to incubate the cicada pupa. As long as one pair of loved ones harbored selfish motives, the refinement would immediately fail. But after the refinement was successful, the yearning intestines goo would never be separated. Its love was stronger than gold, and its shell was also like gold and iron. Even divine weapons could not separate it. In particular, if one goo insect died, the other goo insect would erupt with several times the power and perish together with it. The heavenly demon dance in Chu Xiu's hand slashed out and directly hit the goo insect, causing a deafening sound to erupt. Although the seemingly small insect was directly slashed away by the heavenly demon dance, it unexpectedly flew up again and went straight to Chu Xiu. The yearning intestines goo was extremely fast, but no matter how fast it could not be faster than Chu Xiu, who had the heaven's sun gazing at air, so Chu Xiu was not worried that it would hurt him. It was just that having two little bugs flying around in front of him was also a very annoying thing, so at this time, Chu Xiu took the initiative to slow down a step and let one of the yearning intestines broken goo enter his body. In an instant, the power of the indestructible demon pill erupted, and a powerful demonic aura instantly cut off the connection between the Holy Maiden of the moon-worshipping cult and the goo. The Holy Maiden did not care. Although goo insects could be controlled, they were also living beings in this world, even if they were artificially refined. So even if she did not control them, they still had their instincts and could still hurt people. But at this moment, the glazed golden thread goo living in Chu Xiu's heart trembled slightly, emitting an angry emotion. Goo insects had no intelligence, only instinct. For the glazed golden thread goo, Chu Xiu was its host, and Chu Xiu's body was its house. But now, someone had actually intruded into its territory. How could it tolerate this? Waves of golden power erupted, and in the midst of the vibration, the yearning intestines goo, which even the heavenly demon dance could not destroy, was directly shaken into powder. The powder merged into Chu Xiu's body, turning into pure power that merged into his dantian. Chapter 705. Chu Xiu didn't know about the effect of the glass golden thread goo before. Perhaps the goo worms that Chu Xiu encountered in the past were too low-end and had no energy, so the glass golden thread goo was not interested in them? However, swallowing this yearning intestines broken goo was equivalent to swallowing a great supplement pill for Chu Xiu, equivalent to 3 months of hard work. At this moment, the other yearning intestines broken goo felt that the goo worm was dead, and its body shone with golden light, bursting out with several times the power. It arrived in front of Chu Xiu almost instantly. But Chu Xiu directly opened his mouth and swallowed the yearning intestines broken goo. He directly used demonic qi to cut off the connection between it and the moon-worshipping cult saintess, and then used the glass golden thread goo to shatter and absorb it. Chu Xiu chewed and grinned at the moon-worshipping cult saintess. It tastes good, crunchy, chicken-flavored. The moon-worshipping cult saintess' pretty face hidden under the veil was twisted with anger. She was a little confused about Chu Xiu's background. After the yearning intestines broken goo entered Chu Xiu's body, it was cut off by his demonic qi. So she only knew that the yearning intestines broken goo was dead. She didn't hold back when fighting against an opponent of Chu Xiu's level. The yearning intestines broken goo was one of the strongest goo worms that she had refined meticulously. It took her a lot of time to refine, and it took her 3 years to refine it successfully. With the strength of the moon-worshipping cult, it was easy to find those who loved each other. But the difficulty was that she couldn't determine whether these two people truly loved each other. Once one of them made a mistake, the entire refinement of the goo worm would be completely ruined. So in these 3 years, the refinement actually took less than half a year. For the rest of the time, the moon-worshipping cult saintess was trying to use various means to test those couples, gathering these 99 pairs of loved ones. The saintess of the moon-worshipping cult never wanted to try this kind of goo worm again in her next life. But today, it was eaten by Chu Xiu as a snack. How could she not be angry? However, the saintess of the moon-worshipping cult did not continue to attack. She was a little uncertain about Chu Xiu's strength. Instead, she rushed over to Yi Tianxia and shouted, "Yi Tianxia, what are you still looking at? Why aren't you attacking? Are you still a man?" Yi Tianxia was stunned when he heard that, but then a trace of anger appeared on his face. Any man would not be able to tolerate such words. He wanted to make a move, but just now, the Holy Virgin of the Moon worshipping cult was in a heated battle with Chu Xiao. He thought that she was prepared to have a fair fight with Chu Xiao and defeat him in public to gain fame. Who knew that this woman was so fickle? Even so, Yi Tianxie still snorted coldly when he heard the words of the Holy Virgin of the Moon worshipping cult. The blood dragon spear in his hand flashed with boundless bloodlight as it stabbed towards Chu Xiao. Ever since he was defeated by Chu Xiao last time, he had been in seclusion in the omniscient sect. Not only had his realm improved, but his combat power had also skyrocketed. As he stabbed with his spear, the blood dragon tattoo on his body shone brightly, and a powerful aura turned into a blood dragon phantom hovering behind him, letting out a roar. It was as if an ancient ferocious beast had descended, and its power was extremely fierce. In all fairness, Yi Tianxie's spear was indeed very strong. This person could swallow the blood dragon Niden as a human and not die, and he had also successfully cultivated the demonic beast cultivation method. If he had been a little earlier, his current strength would have been enough to be one of the 5 people who fought against Zhang Qingjin in Xiaofan Tian. He definitely had the strength comparable to an ordinary martial Dao master. Unfortunately, Chu Xiao was not an ordinary martial Dao master. The heavenly demon dance slashed down, and the death intent and evil spirit condensed. The blade seemed to have condensed all the negative forces in this part of the world into one, blooming with unparalleled power. With a loud bang, the blood dragon collapsed, and the bloodlight dissipated. Yi Tianxie was directly sent flying by Chu Xiao's blade. He looked at Chu Xiao with a pale face, and the hand holding the spear was trembling slightly. In fact, Yi Tianxie's real advantage lay in his strength. He swallowed the blood dragon Niden and cultivated the cultivation method of an ancient ferocious beast. What was the strongest thing about ferocious beasts? It was power itself. Therefore, in Yi Tianxie's opinion, although he was still in the unity of heaven and man realm, his strength was stronger than that of a martial Dao master. However, in front of Chu Xiao, the strength that he was so proud of did not even last one move before it was directly broken. When the Holy Virgin of the Moon worshipping cult saw this scene, she whispered disdainfully, "What a disgrace!" She still wanted to challenge Zhang Qingjin in this state? She was even dissatisfied with Chu Xiao? What a joke! The Holy Virgin of the Moon worshipping cult directly waved her hand and snorted coldly, "Let's go." Neither of them could defeat Chu Xiao. Even if they joined forces, the result would be the same. The only difference was how long they would lose. Moreover, 80% of the strength of the Holy Virgin of the Moon worshipping cult came from the venomous insects she had refined. She still did not know the depth of Chu Xiao. If she released all her trump cards and still could not kill Chu Xiao, she would be the unlucky one. She did not manage to snatch Master Yuan Ji, so she had made a wasted trip. However, the Dao sect of West Chu was also very powerful. There were many fortune-tellers who were similar to Master Yuan Ji or had the same strength as Master Yuan Ji, so the moon-worshipping cult saintess walked very quickly. Of course, she was also afraid that if they continued to fight, the venomous insects she had raised would be eaten by Chu Xiao like beans. The other venomous insects were not like the venomous insects that could be consumed in large quantities when they besieged Chu Xiao. They were extremely difficult to refine. Zhang Qingjin left, and the Holy Virgin of the Moon-worshipping cult retreated. At this time, Chu Xiao turned to Master Yuan Ji and said lightly, "Now, Master, you should be able to leave with me, right?" Master Yuan Ji showed a smile that was uglier than crying and said, "I'll go pack up." Before he could finish speaking, Master Yuan Ji turned his head away and swallowed the rest of his words. His Taoist temple had been destroyed by the fight between Chu Xiao and Zhang Qingjin. Why would he need to pack up? It was a pity that he still had more than 10 concubines in West Chu, so he definitely could not take them away. However, it did not matter. He had more concubines in northern Yen. During the time he was away, those women had better not be unable to resist having an affair. Otherwise, there was no adulterous couple that he could not predict. In the broken temple on the path from West Chu to northern Yen, Chu Xiao roasted 2 chickens. He kept one for himself and threw the other to Master Yuan Ji. However, when Master Yuan Ji looked at the roasted chicken that Chu Xiao gave him, his eyes showed a trace of disdain. He was not an ascetic cultivator of Taoism. After so many years of fortune-telling, the money he earned was either used to raise concubines or to eat, drink and be merry. Those were all luxurious clothes and fine food. He really did not care for such tasteless things. However, in front of Chu Xiao, He did not dare to say that the food that Chu Xiu roasted was not delicious. Instead, he gratefully accepted it and said, "Thank you, official Chu." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said calmly, "You're welcome. I, Chu Xiu, have never mistreated my own people. However, can I believe that you're one of us now?" As he spoke, Chu Xiu stared into Master Yuanji's eyes. The pressure he emitted made Master Yuanji tremble. Master Yuanji laughed bitterly and said, "Official Chu, don't worry. I have no way out. You can see that I've offended the Celestial Master Abode and the moon-worshipping cult. There's no place for me in the righteous path or the demonic path. If I don't follow official Chu, who else can I follow?" Chu Xiu did not sense anything amiss from Master Yuanji's words. He thought about it and said in a deep voice, "What I'm going to tell you next is very secretive. It's so secretive that aside from you, I've never told anyone else about it. I hope you can keep it a secret. I hope you can keep it a secret and be a living person, not a dead person." As he said this, Chu Xiu used the heaven-sun gazing at air technique to sense the slightest change in Master Yuanji's body. At the same time, he used his mental strength to the extreme, covering Master Yuanji like a large net. If Master Yuanji made any strange moves, Chu Xiu would kill him and replace him with someone else. Fortunately, Master Yuanji did not make any strange moves. Instead, he said solemnly, "Official Chu, although I'm not a good person, I still have to abide by the rules of fortune tellers. This is also the only thing that my master wants me to stick to until the day I die. All these years, I've been telling fortunes for people, but I've never divulged a single word. Otherwise, official Chu, do you think I would still be alive and have my current reputation?" Master Yuanji was not bragging. The line of fortune tellers had always been in the business of divulging the secrets of heaven. If he also divulged the information of others, it would bring about both natural and man-made disasters. It would be hard for him not to die. Chu Xiu nodded. At the same time, she furrowed her brows and thought about what she should say in order to let Master Yuanji know about her situation. She could not reveal the shocking fact that she had transmigrated. Seeing that Chu Xiu was deep in thought, Master Yuanji stealthily put the roast chicken aside and pretended to listen attentively. After a while, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Master Yuanji, have you heard of reincarnation?" Master Yuanji was stunned and said, "Of course I've heard of it, especially the Tantric Buddhism sect. They firmly believe in reincarnation. Moreover, there's a cultivation method in the Tantric Buddhism sect that can seal one's primordial spirit before death and then inject it into a baby's body. When the baby grows up, they can use a secret technique to awaken it. That's reincarnation. However, this secret technique has too many flaws. If anything goes wrong, the primordial spirit will be damaged, and the consciousness will dissipate. Reincarnation will become an inheritance. I heard that there are people in the Tantric Buddhism sect who have lived 2 lives with this secret technique. However, people with immortality are not allowed in this world. Those people died a violent death before they could live to the 3rd life. Moreover, it's not a deliberate reincarnation. The primordial spirit is extremely mysterious. It's not just a legend." Chu Xiu nodded and looked straight at Master Yuanji. "It's good that you're mentally prepared. What if I say that I'm someone else's reincarnation?" Chapter 706. When Yuanji heard Chu Xiu's words, he could not help but look surprised. However, he was not surprised for too long. He only revealed a look of understanding and said, "So you're actually the reincarnation of a powerhouse. No wonder you have such strength. I'm sorry for not recognizing you. May I know which powerhouse you were in your previous life? Perhaps I've even heard of you." Reincarnation was something that would ruin the worldview of others. However, Master Yuanji was experienced and knowledgeable, so he was not too shocked. Instead, he was a little curious. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I'm not the reincarnation of a powerhouse. To be precise, I've only lived 2 lives. I wasn't a powerhouse in my previous life either. After I died in an accident, I became the owner of this body, Chu Xiu. At first, I thought it was just an accident, but I realized that I've been reborn, and it doesn't seem to be that simple. My memories of my previous life are slowly becoming blurry, and I can't even remember many things clearly. Besides, you've also said that a hand erased everything about me, and I've become a non-existent person. Can this still be considered a reincarnation? Chu Xiu did not mention his transmigration or his discovery that he had a certain connection with Dugu Weiwei. Yuan Ji probably would not understand something like transmigration. As for Dugu Weiwei, he was involved in too many things, so it was not convenient for him to say it. Therefore, it was enough for Chu Xiu to only tell Yuan Ji about his reincarnation. Anyway, his essence was to change from one body to another. Whether it was transmigration or reincarnation, the nature was the same. A thoughtful expression appeared on Master Yuan Ji's face. He thought about it and suddenly said, "Official Chu, how do you know that you're a reincarnation?" Chu Xiu was stunned by Yuan Ji's question. He frowned and said, "I died in an accident in my previous life, and when I came back to life, I became a different person. Don't you think I know that?" Master Yuan Ji considered his tone and said, "Sir, think about it carefully. Is the true proof of a person's existence the memory, the body, or the vital spirit itself?" Chu Xiu thought about it for a moment before saying, "It should be memories. Possession is not a rare thing in history. Once someone is possessed, their original memories will be wiped out, and they will naturally become another person." Master Yuan Ji clapped his hands and said, "Official Chu is right. Memory is the key. That's why you've always believed that you're a reincarnated body. Logically speaking, when I deduce you, I should be able to deduce everything about your past life because that's the real you. But in the end, when I really divined it, everything about you was forcibly erased by someone else. This is very unreasonable, because this involves the extent of changing the heavenly secrets. Therefore, there could only be two possibilities. The first was that the person who concealed the heaven's secrets was already as strong as the heavens, which was why he could do it so flawlessly. However, I'm not bragging. In terms of my attainments in divination, apart from Su Jing from the Zen Karma Hall, there aren't many people who can compare to me. I don't believe that there's anyone in the pugilistic world who can do something that even I can't see a single trace of. The second possibility is that Official Chu, you've always believed that you're a reincarnated body. This is actually wrong. It's just that someone forcefully inserted a memory into your mind, making you think that you're a reincarnated body. As time passes, or as you become stronger, that fake memory will become more and more blurry. You'll then feel that you've forgotten many things. Actually, you've always been you. You've never changed." Yuan Ji's words stunned Chu Xiu. Yuan Ji's guess was something that Chu Xiu had never thought of. This was too shocking, at least to Chu Xiu. He had always thought that his soul had transmigrated, but now, Yuan Ji was telling him that everything about him was fake. Could it be that the earth in his previous life was fake, and the game world in this life was real? Chu Xiu frowned and said, "You mean to say that my memories from my previous life are fake, but why is my personality and everything I know extremely real?" Yuan Ji shook his head and said, "Sir, you've misunderstood me. I only said that someone forcefully inserted a memory into you, but I didn't say that your memory is fake. Fake is fake. No matter how real it is, there will be flaws. Creating something out of nothing is the most difficult thing to do. Therefore, this memory might be real. However, it doesn't belong to you. It's just a memory that has been modified by someone. Even your memories from this life are the same. Your personality has been sealed. The version of yourself in your memories is actually not your original self." Yuan Ji's words were very convoluted, but Chu Xiu understood it. However, he still couldn't accept it. True and false, false and true. If things were really like what Yuan Ji said, then who was the one who caused all this? Dugu Weiwei? If the number one demonic cultivator in the past 10,000 years was not dead, where was he? Chu Xiu couldn't figure it out for the time being. He said in a low voice, "Are you sure that my memory has been tampered with?" Yuan Ji quickly shook his head and said, "I'm just speculating based on my experience. I don't dare to make a 100% conclusion." What Chu Xiu said was too mysterious. Yuan Ji was experienced and had seen all kinds of strange things. Moreover, his lineage also had a history and a complete inheritance. There were even rarer things than what Chu Xiu had seen. That was why he could speculate so many things with his experience. "Then why don't you do it again?" Master Yuan Ji said with a sad face. "Sir, if you continue, I really can't hold on anymore. We fortune tellers who practice divination don't have strong qi and blood. If I spit out a few more mouthfuls of blood, I will really die. As fortune tellers who practiced divination for a long time, they would always encounter all kinds of things and inevitably suffer from backlash. However, such things often happened only once in a few years. As a result, he had encountered it twice in a row with Chu Xiao. If it happened a few more times, his body really wouldn't be able to hold on. Chu Xiao frowned and said, "Then how can you prove that what you said is based on what you said?" Chu Xiao had spent so much effort to capture Master Yuan Ji. For this, he did not hesitate to offend the celestial master abode and even made a move against the moon-worshipping cult. If Master Yuan Ji was just using these speculations to brush him off, Chu Xiao would not be satisfied. Master Yuan Ji had a helpless expression on his face. At this moment, he suddenly thought of something and immediately said, "Sir, although I can't prove that your memories have been tampered with, I can prove that this body of yours is not a reincarnation or a possession." "What method?" Master Yuan Ji rubbed his hands and said, "My sect has a secret technique that has been lost for generations. It's called the 3 lives reflection technique. Although it's not like the name says, it can see through a person's past and future. However, it can see through a person's essence and know if the person's primordial spirit and body are one." Chu Xiao glanced at him and said, "If you know something that has been lost for generations, how can it be called lost?" Master Yuan Ji smiled sheepishly and said, "Actually, the main thing that has been lost is the treasure that activates this secret technique, the 3 live stone. Therefore, it's impossible to use this secret technique alone." Chu Xiao suddenly remembered that when he entered Xiaofan heaven, he had seen a 3 live stone. It was refined by the Bliss Demon Palace, a demonic sect. He wondered if it was the same thing as the 3 live stone that Master Yuan Ji was talking about. "If there's nothing, then what are you talking about?" Chu Xiao snorted softly. Master Yuan Ji hurriedly said, "Although my sect lost the 3 live stone, the patriarch thought of a way to replace it with something else. However, it's a little difficult to obtain that thing. At least in my generation, there's no chance of obtaining it. Therefore, this cultivation technique is no different from being lost for generations." "What is it?" Master Yuan Ji said, "Sir, have you heard of the divine sacrificial jade?" Chu Xiao frowned and said, "It sounds a little familiar." Master Yuan Ji smiled and said, "The divine sacrificial jade is the secret treasure of the Jailing Dong family. It's a rare treasure that can strengthen one's mental strength and can even be reused. In fact, the divine sacrificial jade is a name given by the patriarch of the Jailing Dong family. It's actually a fragment of the ancient treasure, the soul fixation pearl. With this item, it's as effective as the 3 live stone, or even better. The Jailing Dong family was one of the 9 super aristocratic families. Although they weren't considered strong among the 9 super aristocratic families, they weren't weak either. At least compared to Master Yuan Ji's branch of fortune tellers, they were a huge force. Therefore, his branch only coveted the divine sacrificial jade and didn't have any improper thoughts. If he could touch the divine sacrificial jade in his generation, it would be a great fortune. He couldn't afford to offend the Jailing Dong family, but Chu Xiao could. The hidden demons were much more powerful than the Jailing Dong family. Master Yuan Ji was sure of this. Chu Xiao frowned and said, "As one of the 9 super aristocratic families, the Jailing Dong family has joined the righteous Tao to fight against the moon-worshipping cult. Do you know about this?" Master Yuan Ji wasn't a newbie in the Jianghu. When he heard Chu Xiao's words, the excitement on his face froze. Even an idiot would know that once the Jailing Dong family joined the righteous Tao, it meant that he would have a lot of power behind him. Once the hidden demons joined the righteous Tao, no matter what their motive was, it would cause a huge commotion. Therefore, with the current tense situation, Chu Xiao couldn't act rashly. However, Chu Xiao said calmly, "However, even if I can't use the hidden demon's power, can't I use other methods? This divine sacrificial jade is mine." If it was something else, Chu Xiao might have held back and waited for the storm to blow over before making his move. However, this divine sacrificial jade was related to Chu Xiao's deepest secret. Chu Xiao didn't want to delay any longer. Chapter 707. Chu Xiao was actually a very reasonable person. In fact, most of the time, Chu Xiao didn't want to solve problems with violence, but with reason. Unfortunately, most of the time, reason was not as effective as violence. This time, Chu Xiu went to the Dong family to reason with them. After all, he was not so arrogant as to destroy the Dong family by himself and forcibly seize the divine jade. When Dong Qikuan, the family head of the Dong family, and the patriarch of the Dong family heard that Chu Xiu had come to see them, both of them were stunned. Why did Chu Xiu come to the Dong family? Strictly speaking, there was still some hatred between Chu Xiu and the Dong family. In the past, during the opening ceremony of the Dong family wanted to seize the inheritance of Marquis Wan from Lu Fengxian, but they were taught a lesson by Chen Qingdi. If Chen Qingdi had not been there, Chu Xiu would have had to fight with Lu Fengxian and the others against the Dong family. After that, the people of the Dong family naturally did not dare to resent Chen Qingdi, so they could only come to find trouble with Chu Xiu. When the Eastern Qi alliance besieged Chu Xiu, the people of the Dong family really wanted to hit them when they were down, but they were stopped by Chen Qingdi on the way. The Dong family was not sure whether Chu Xiu knew about it or not, so now that Chu Xiu came to visit, the Dong family was really confused. Moreover, even if there was no such thing, the Dong family had already joined the side of the righteous path. Although Chu Xiu was not a member of the moon-worshipping cult, Mo was also a demon. His appearance here was still a little sensitive. Dong Qikuan asked, "Patriarch, what should we do now? Should we meet or not?" After pondering for a moment, the patriarch of the Dong clan said, "Since he's here, let's meet him. This is the Dong clan, and Chu Xiu came here alone. I don't think he can play any tricks." Upon hearing the patriarch of the Dong clan's words, Dong Qikuan waved his hand and asked someone to bring Chu Xiu into the hall. Seeing Chu Xiu come in, Dong Qikuan revealed a fake smile and said, "Official Chu is not in the Northern Yen to be the Zhanwu Hall's governor. How come you have the time to come to West Chu? Are you preparing to create a suppression martial hall in West Chu?" Chu Xiu lightly said, "Dong family head must be joking. Even if I wanted to, I don't think the West Chu royal family would have the guts." Dong Qikuan also smiled. The West Chu royal family was indeed a joke in West Chu. They weren't powerful and didn't have a strong sense of existence. Most of the places in West Chu weren't managed by the West Chu royal family, but by some sects, aristocratic families, or the elders of some local tribes. Therefore, almost all the martial arts forces in West Chu didn't take the West Chu royal family seriously. When they were in a bad mood, it was common for them to curse the royal family in public and use them as a punching bag. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I'll cut to the chase. I'm here to make a deal with the Dong clan." Dong Qikuan was surprised and asked, "What kind of deal?" Chu Xiu leaned forward and stared at Dong Qikuan, saying, "I want to trade for the Dong clan's divine jade." Before Dong Qikuan could say anything, the patriarch of the Dong clan said, "Impossible." The patriarch of the Dong clan snorted and said, "Do you know what the divine jade means to the Dong clan? This isn't a treasure, but a legacy. The Dong clan will be able to benefit from this legacy for generations to come. How could our Dong clan possibly hand it over?" Chu Xiu said calmly, "Don't be so excited, old senior. Since it's a deal, I can offer you something of the same level. If the divine sacrificial jade can be passed down, then the cultivation technique that I took out can also be passed down. Have you heard of the annihilating sky and destroying earth? It's one of the most powerful demonic cultivation methods, the Great Compassion Poem. Not only am I cultivating it, but many experts in the Eastern Qi army are also cultivating it. There's also the 9 words formula of fast and slow, a Buddhist cultivation method. I believe Patriarch Dong has heard of it. If you don't, you can check the information of the wind-sweeping tower. As long as the Dong clan agrees to trade with me, you can choose 3 of the 9 words formula of fast and slow. If the Dong clan doesn't want the martial arts of the Buddhist sect and the demon sect, I have the sword art and the saber art. In short, I can give you any martial arts you want." After listening to Chu Xiu, the patriarch of the Dong clan and Dong Qikuan were excited. They didn't expect that Chu Xiu would be so generous. He was willing to offer his family's wealth in exchange for the divine jade. Dong Qikuan's eyes lit up, and he said, "You mean you can give these cultivation methods to the Dong clan?" Chu Xiu said calmly, "Of course not. You can only choose one of them. Otherwise, I won't call it a trade, but an inheritance." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, the patriarch of the Dong clan looked disappointed. If he wanted to trade for the Dong clan's god-sacrificed jade with just these items, then it would be far from enough. Chu Xiu's cultivation method inheritance wasn't a secret in the underworld. The patriarch of the Dong clan also knew that his cultivation method inheritance was very powerful. If they could get all of Chu Xiu's cultivation method inheritance, it would be a great opportunity for the Dong clan. But if they only got one cultivation method, it would only be the icing on the cake. It wouldn't directly enhance the strength of the Dong clan. Therefore, Dong Qikuan said calmly, "I'm sorry. My Dong clan would like to cooperate with you. Official Chu. However, you should know about the current situation in the underworld of West Chu. Although you are not a cultivator of the moon-worshipping cult, the Bright Devil and the Hidden Devil are both devils. When the time comes, my Dong clan will inevitably be suppressed. So, I hope official Chu will be magnanimous." Chu Xiu didn't pester Dong Qikuan. He just nodded and left decisively. Dong Qikuan and the patriarch of the Dong family were stunned by this. Dong Qikuan asked doubtfully, "Patriarch, what do you think Chu Xiu is going to do with the divine jade?" The patriarch of the Dong clan thought for a moment and said, "I heard that Chu Xiu's attainment in the primordial spirit secret technique is not weak. He most likely has reached a bottleneck in the primordial spirit secret technique and wants to use our Dong clan's divine jade to break through. Don't worry about him. The divine jade is our Dong clan's most precious treasure. He wants to trade it with a cultivation method. It's simply wishful thinking. It would be better if the celestial master mansion came. But trading with Chu Xiu is just causing trouble for no reason." In fact, the main reason why the Dong clan refused Chu Xiu was because of Chu Xiu's identity. If the people from the celestial master mansion came and exchanged any cultivation method for the divine jade, the Dong clan would gladly agree, because they could build a good relationship with the celestial master mansion. However, Chu Xiu had a grudge against the Dong family, and the other party was a member of the Yinma clan. At such a sensitive and critical moment, the Dong family had nothing better to do than to make a deal with Chu Xiu. Therefore, the Dong clan didn't care about this matter. Seeing that Chu Xiu didn't pester them, they thought that the matter had been settled. Outside the Dong clan, when Master Yuanji saw Chu Xiu coming out, he went up to him and asked, "Your Excellency, did you get the divine jade successfully?" Chu Xiu shook his head, but Master Yuanji's expression was as if he had expected it. From his point of view, Chu Xiu could just use his knife to snatch it away. It was not his style at all for him to want to ask for a letter. However, the problem was that it was not easy to use a knife at such a sensitive time. Therefore, it was a bit embarrassing. "Your Excellency, what are you going to do now?" A cold light flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes as he said, "What should I do? I'm determined to get the divine jade. Since the Dong clan doesn't want it, don't blame me for getting even with you." The Dong clan thought that Chu Xiu didn't know that they had tried to hit him when he was down. However, how could Chu Xiu not know that? However, there were too many forces that wanted to attack him or had already attacked him. Chu Xiu didn't have the strength and energy to take revenge on them one by one. Originally, Chu Xiu was going to trade good goods to get the divine jade as soon as possible. However, the Dong clan didn't give him any face. Chu Xiu didn't tell Grandmaster Yuanji what he wanted to do. Instead, he went straight to the World Alliance's territory to look for Xie Xiaolu. He only came to look for Xie Xiaolu, not Emperor Chen Qing. With Chen Qingdi's strength, he could easily force the Dong clan to hand over the divine jade. However, Chu Xiu was a person who knew his limits. His relationship with Chen Qingdi wasn't that close. What right did he have to ask Chen Qingdi to help him? Moreover, the Dong clan was already a member of the Righteous Alliance. The Heaven Alliance was a neutral force, neither righteous nor demonic. At this time, if Chen Qingdi acted, it would implicate too many people. Everyone thought that Emperor Chen Qingdi was a boorish fellow, but in reality, he knew better than anyone else that a boorish fellow might be very powerful, but he would never be able to create the Heaven Alliance, which was the leader of the 6 great sections. Therefore, Chu Xiu came to find Xie Xiaolu to ask for a small favor. After all, he didn't have any foundation in West Chu. Seeing Chu Xiu, Xie Xiaolu said in surprise, "Brother Chu, how come you have the time to come to West Chu? Have you already taken control of the situation in the northern Yen? And who is this?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I came to West Chu to find something. This is the #1 fortune teller in the northern Yen, Master Yuan Ji. He will be a member of the Martial Suppression Hall." Saying this, Chu Xiu told Xie Xiaolu about his intention to trade the divine jade. Of course, he didn't say what he wanted to do with the divine jade. Xie Xiaolu said, "Jailing Dong clan? Brother Chu, don't worry. The Dong clan is nothing in the eyes of the Heaven Alliance. Since they don't know how to appreciate favors, I will let my master talk to them. They will definitely agree." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "No need to trouble Senior Chen. The Jailing Dong clan has already joined the Righteous Alliance. If Senior Chen takes action, the implications will be too great. I just want to ask you for a favor. With the help of the Heaven Alliance, help me spread some news in West Chu." Xie Xiaolu said in surprise, "What news?" Chu Xiu pointed at Master Yuanji, who was leisurely drinking tea, and said, "A piece of news about him. Say that I, Zhang Qingzhen, and the moon-worshipping cult Saintess fought for Master Yuanji. And the reason for fighting for Master Yuanji is because he divined that an ancient treasure is in the Dong clan. As for what the treasure is, you can make it up. Is it a cultivation technique, a divine weapon, or something else? The more exaggerated the better." Chapter 708. Everything in Jianghu was a mixture of truth and falsehood. Countless news came every day, but for most people, they would rather believe the truth than not. For example, recently, there was some news in the Jianghu that Chu Xiu of the Yinma clan and the Saintess of the moon-worshipping cult had gone to Mount Longhu to rob a master of divination named Yuanji. In the end, the little celestial master, Zhang Qingzhen, had come to stop them. The reason was that Yuanji had divined a treasure hidden in the Dong family. Some people said that the treasure was a legendary peerless saber technique from ancient times, one of the 7 limits of devouring heaven and earth. That was why Chu Xiu, who used a saber, was attracted. Some people said that the treasure was the heaven-devouring insect, a primordial poisonous insect born from heaven and earth. That was why the Saintess of the moon-worshipping cult coveted it. There were even people who said that the Dong family actually possessed the secret scripture left behind by the Dao sect's patriarch, Lu Chunyang. As for why Lu Chunyang's secret scripture wasn't in the pure Yang Dao sect but in the Dong family, no one knew. Anyway, the news became more and more exaggerated. There were all kinds of rumors, and this matter was not fabricated. There were countless witnesses. Many people saw the battle. Chu Xiu fought Zhang Chuanzong and Zhang Qingzhen of the Celestial Master Mansion and tied with them. In the end, the Saintess of the moon-worshipping cult joined in, but it seemed that she was defeated by Chu Xiu. In the investigation of some people, Yuanji's identity was also very clear. Although he was known as the #1 fortune teller in Northern Yen, in a place like Northern Yen, the power of Taoism was pitifully small. There was not even a decent Taoist temple. The power of Taoism in the world was 60% in Eastern Qi, 3.5% in Western Chu, and the remaining half in Northern Yen. Therefore, although Yuanji was known as the first fortune teller of the Northern Yen, in fact, there were not many people in Jianghu who could compare with him, but there were still some who could be named. Chu Xiu, Zhang Qingzhen, and the Holy Maiden of the moon-worshipping cult fought over this guy. Other than this, no one could think of any other reason. There were many doubtful points in this news. For example, since the Celestial Master's mansion knew that Grandmaster Yuanji had divined that the Dong family had a precious treasure, why didn't they bring him to the Celestial Master's mansion? Why did they let him roam around at the foot of Mount Longhu? For example, if the moon-worshipping sect also knew about this, why did they insist on sending their holy maiden here? Any one of the 9 divine Magispriests could do this better than her. There was also Chu Xiu. He was in the Northern Yen country. The West Chu country's Jianghu hadn't heard anything about this, so how did he get the news and come here ahead of time? What was even more bizarre was the news itself. Everyone knew that if one wanted to be a fortune teller, it was best to control their mouths. In the end, Yuanji divined that the Dong family had a precious treasure, and he foolishly leaked it. Could it be that the rumor was true, that he accidentally leaked it in bed, and then the aunt of his concubine's cousin's second aunt leaked it? Although this piece of news was extremely unreliable, it was still better to believe it than not. Therefore, in just over 10 days, the attention that the Dong family received skyrocketed. At this time, in a small town near the Dong family, Chu Xiu was eating with Grandmaster Yuanji in a private room. The World Alliance was really efficient. Xie Xiaolu didn't even tell Chen Qingdi about the news. He just found a few deacons of the World Alliance, and the matter was immediately settled, leaving no loose ends. This was the effect of being a local tyrant. Even if Chu Xiu wanted to create such a scene in northern Yan country, he would have to join hands with the imperial court. However, the World Alliance did it easily. Yuan Ji, who was fussily picking at the dishes on the table, seemed a little disgusted. The chefs in such a small place were really not good. Their cooking skills were a little too modern. At the same time, he still had some resentment towards Chu Xiu. If it was a scheme, then so be it. Why did Chu Xiu have to drag him into it? In any case, Yuan Ji was considered a big shot in the pugilistic world. But now, his reputation was completely ruined. Who would dare to ask a fortune-teller for a divination? Of course, although he still had resentment, he didn't dare to vent it on Chu Xiu. Instead, he poured a cup of wine for Chu Xiu and said, "Sir, the Dong family is probably in a daze now. When are you going to make your move?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said indifferently, "It's not the right time yet. The Dong family is one of the 9 great families. How can they be killed and robbed so easily? A piece of gold in the hands of a child will attract others to fight over it. But in the hands of a strong man, it will only make people envy and drool. Of course, the Dong family is not a child, but a strong man, and a strong man with a saber." Yuan Ji thought for a while and said, "Sir, are you going to remove the saber of the Dong family first?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "No, I'm going to turn the gold in his hands into the 7 treasures glazed glaze first, and then attract a group of strong men with sabers and greedy hungry wolves." Inside the Dong family, Dong Qikuan, the patriarch of the Dong family, more than 10 elders and powerful martial artists of the Dong family all stared at each other in confusion. The news in the pugilistic world had spread too fast these days. When the news reached the Dong family, the people of the Dong family were all dumbfounded. Since when did our family have a precious treasure? 7 limits? Heaven-devouring worm? They had never even seen a caterpillar, okay? However, the rumors outside were so real that even the people of the Dong family had some doubts. A deacon of the Dong family couldn't help but ask, "Patriarch, does our Dong family really have the 7 limits of the ancient supreme saber art?" The face of the patriarch of the Dong family immediately darkened. He directly threw a teacup at him and scolded, "Are you stupid? Do you believe what others say? If our Dong family really had this kind of saber art, we would have taken it out for everyone to cultivate. We would have surpassed the Ying family of Shangshui and become the leader of the 9 great families. Why would we still be here?" The deacon of the Dong family shrunk his neck and didn't dare to say anything. In fact, it was hard to say. Don't think that the Dong family didn't have any selfishness. It was common for someone to hide the cultivation method and cultivate it for the sake of fame, profit, or power. So, the people of the Dong family couldn't be blamed for suspecting it. The patriarch of the Dong family looked around and said in a deep voice, "All of you, put away your petty thoughts. I'll say it again, the rumors outside are pure nonsense." After saying that, the patriarch of the Dong family glanced at Dong Qikuan and said, "Qikuan, send someone to spread the news that the rumors are nonsense and can't be trusted." Dong Qikuan nodded and immediately sent someone to do it. After the others left, Dong Qikuan frowned and said, "Patriarch, what the hell is going on? Who is scheming against our Dong family? What's in it for them to do that?" The gossip didn't cause any harm to the Dong family. It was just a little troublesome to be spied on all the time. So, the person who spread the rumor was purely to disgust the Dong family? The patriarch of the Dong family shook his head and said, "I don't know. There are many people in the West Chu who have enmity with our Dong family. Who knows who did it?" At this time, Dong Qikuan suddenly said, "Could it be Chu Xiu? He is also a participant in this matter. Moreover, he insisted on trading the divine abandoned jade a few days ago, but we refused. Could it be that he harbors hatred in his heart and made such a thing happen?" The patriarch of the Dong family thought for a moment and shook his head. "It doesn't seem like it. If it is Chu Xiu, then the saintess of the moon-worshipping cult is also a suspect. Even the moon-worshipping cult is more suspicious than Chu Xiu. After all, our Dong family is on the side of the righteous sects, and we are enemies with the moon-worshipping cult." Although Chu Xiu was a junior, it had to be said that the fact that he was able to become the successor of the Hidden Devil clan, and was even the only elite of the younger generation who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the little celestial master, showed that he had some magnanimity. He has done things at the expense of others to benefit himself, but this matter is purely harmful to others. I don't think he is that narrow-minded, right? Dong Qikuan also nodded his head. What the patriarch said was reasonable, but if it wasn't Chu Xiao who did it, who else could it be? In short, this matter was a bit confusing, and the Dong family had to be careful for the time being. In the following days, the Dong family announced to the Jianghu that this matter was completely false. However, many people in the Jianghu didn't believe it. Who would believe it if you said it wasn't true? Many people even thought that the Dong family was trying to hide something. At this time, Chu Xiao was hiding around the Dong family, silently observing everything. At the same time, he was also waiting for an opportunity to add fuel to the fire of the Dong family. The Dong family was close to the innumerable huge mountains. There was no big prefecture nearby, only a small city named Ji City. It was relatively prosperous, and there were many people in the Jianghu who came here to trade some spiritual herbs they had obtained from the innumerable huge mountains, or some rare and precious things. Compared to some elixir stores, it was more cost-effective to buy some precious spiritual herbs here and refine them on your own than to go to elixir stores to buy finished elixirs. Of course, not everyone knew much about spiritual herbs, and there were many profiteers who used fake goods to fool people. At this time, a young man who was about 17 or 18 years old, dressed in luxurious clothes, was sizing up the street vendors who were hawking spiritual herbs. He wanted to buy them, but he wasn't sure if he could. He was dressed in luxurious clothes, and it seemed that he came from an aristocratic family. His style was obviously different from those martial arts practitioners who were dressed roughly. However, in fact, apart from his identity and clothes, he wasn't much better than those martial arts practitioners. He was a disciple of the Dong family in Jialing. His name was Dong Yunqing, and he was a direct descendant of the Dong family. To be precise, he was a direct descendant of the Dong family in the past. The direct descendant of the Dong family was not fixed, and everything was based on strength. If one's bloodline was strong, then one would be a direct descendant. On the other hand, if one's bloodline didn't have any experts, then one would be a collateral descendant. Dong Yunqing's bloodline used to be the family head, but there weren't any experts after that. His father's strength was not bad, and he even fought with the current family head, Dong Qikuan, for the position of family head. Unfortunately, he died prematurely due to an accident, and he was the only one left in his bloodline. Therefore, although he was a direct descendant, his life was actually not as good as the collateral descendants. Chapter 709. In ordinary aristocratic families, disciples like Dong Chengyun, who was only 17 or 18 years old, had a very easy life. Before the official time to roam Jianghu, with the protection of the family, they could choose to eat, drink, play, or practice martial arts every day as they pleased. But Dong Chengyun was different. He was very anxious. Because his father had competed with Dong Qikuan for the position of the head of the Dong family, Dong Qikuan didn't like him very much. Of course, as the head of the Dong family, Dong Qikuan couldn't bully the younger generation. But as long as Dong Qikuan's attitude was here, Dong Chengyun wouldn't have an easy time. Therefore, in the Dong family, Dong Chengyun was suppressed. Although he was a direct descendant, his treatment was not as good as that of the collateral relatives. If his generation didn't improve, his bloodline would be reduced to a collateral relative. The elixirs distributed to him by the family were very few. Although Dong Chengyun practiced very hard, he didn't have the support of elixirs. His talent was not very strong. Whether it was his realm or strength, he was far inferior to those direct descendants. Among the younger generation of the Dong family, the most outstanding disciples had reached the internal or physical invulnerability realm. But he was still in the natural realm. Although he was better than most of the disciples, he was still not good enough. Therefore, he could only come here with his savings to try his luck. At this moment, a sarcastic voice came. "Yo, isn't it second young Master Dong? Why do you come to such a place to make a living?" Dong Chengyun looked up and saw a young man in white sitting in a restaurant on the side of the street. The young man was smiling at him playfully. A touch of anger appeared on Dong Chengyun's face. This man was called Fong Lin, a young disciple of a small family in West Chu. Originally, they had no grievances against each other. Even if Dong Chengyun had no status, he was still a direct descendant of the Dong family. However, This man had a good relationship with some direct descendants of the Dong family, who disliked him. Therefore, he ridiculed Dong Chengyun unscrupulously, not worrying about offending the Dong family at all. At this time, several figures appeared by the window of the restaurant. They were the direct descendants of the Dong family. Looking at Dong Chengyun, they sneered, "Dong Chengyun, are the cultivation resources given by the family not enough? You actually came here to snatch things from a group of loose cultivators. What a disgrace. In my opinion, you should just give up on this idea as soon as possible. What's there to fight for? Do you think you can fight for a successor?" Dong Chengyun clenched his fists, but he didn't say anything. He just turned around and left. This scene caused everyone in the restaurant to burst into laughter. At this time, Dong Chengyun did not know that in another alley, Chu Xiao and Yuan Ji were standing there, secretly watching Dong Chengyun. Chu Xiao said lightly, "How is this kid?" Master Yuan Ji nodded and said, "Not bad. He is quite a character. It's rare for him to be able to hold back his anger at such a young age. The rarest thing was that he was able to endure patiently and had perseverance. If he grew up, he would be a great figure in the future. However, talent was something given by the heavens. If one's talent wasn't good enough, no matter how hard one worked, it would be useless. In fact, there are many such people in every family, but there are only a few who can rise to power in the end." Master Yuan Ji had been a fortune teller for so many years. He was quite accurate at reading people. Everyone was shouting that man could conquer the heavens. Did the heavens owe you something? Why did they let you win every time? People like Dong Chengyun were able to endure patiently and had enough perseverance. But all this still depended on talent and luck. Without these, one's drive would be wasted, and tolerance would become weakness. Chu Xiao said lightly, "If talent isn't good, I'll give him talent. If luck isn't good, I'll give him luck. The publicity outside is almost done. No need to delay anymore. I'll choose him and give him a fortuitous opportunity." Master Yuan Ji secretly shook his head. Was the fortuitous opportunity given by Chu Xiao so easy to take? Fortuitous opportunities and crises coexisted. However, Master Yuan Ji did not stand up to object. He was not some goody two-shoes. It was not easy for him to live. How could he have the leisure to care about others? And at this time, Dong Chengyun was holding the spirit herbs he bought with his savings. As he walked back, he clenched his fists tightly, his eyes flashing with unwillingness. If his father was still here, even if he could not become the family head, would these people dare to bully him like this? It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. When he was strong enough in the future, he would definitely return all the humiliation he had suffered. At this moment, a voice sounded in his mind. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge? If you really want revenge, then you should keep an eye on him from early to late. The power of hatred is very strong, but the stronger power is time. You have hatred in your heart now, so you can use the power of hatred and perseverance to endure and cultivate. But as time wears away, when your hatred is gone, what will you have left? You can only bear it. In the end, you don't even have the strength to stand up. Dong Chengyun was shocked. He looked around at the streets. There were still people coming and going in a hurry. Who was talking? At this moment the voice said again, "I'll give you an opportunity. As for how you want to use this opportunity, it's up to you. I only hope that you don't bring disgrace to it." As the voice faded, an image immediately appeared in Dong Chengyun's mind. It was a figure wielding a blade. It was a simple blade, but it contained an unparalleled aura. It was so powerful that it could shake mountains and split seas. It was deeply imprinted in his mind. In the next moment, he suddenly opened his eyes. He was still standing on the crowded street, but his face was pale and he was sweating profusely. It was as if he had just been fished out of the water. The people around him were also looking at him curiously. A strange look appeared on Dong Chengyun's face. He immediately turned around and left. In the alley, Master Yuan Ji flattered, "Official Chu's spiritual strength is really strong. Such meticulous operation. I'm afraid that even the great ancestor of the Xiaofan clan, who has cultivated the spirit-controlling skill to the advanced level, is not as good as you." Chu Xiao said lightly, "Don't flatter me. It's just a small trick." Chu Xiao was not being modest. It was indeed a small trick. Just now, what Chu Xiao gave Dong Chengyun was not the 7 limits. It should be known that Chu Xiao had been infinitely close to the martial arts Grand Master realm in the past, but he still vomited blood after taking a look at the Breaking Sea realm. Now, if Chu Xiao passed the real Breaking Sea realm to Dong Chengyun, his head would immediately explode. Therefore, he just used the art of extinguishing heaven and destroying earth and soul shifting to forcibly inject his will into Dong Chengyun's mind, as well as the Breaking Sea realm. Of course, it was not the original Breaking Sea realm. It could only be regarded as a blurred image left by Chu Xiao when he used the Breaking Sea realm. However, because it was Chu Xiao who took the initiative to inject it into Dong Chengyun's mind, as long as Dong Chengyun used it, it could exert a certain amount of power, and it would not be weak. After this, if Dong Chengyun did not die, this image would be enough to make him a master among his peers, and it could even lay a strong foundation for his future martial arts. Master Yuanji asked curiously, "Your Excellency, what if Dong Chengyun doesn't use the bladesmanship after getting it? Now the storm in Jianghu is getting more and more fierce. If no news is spread, I'm afraid that it will decline from flourishing to becoming a real rumor, and no one will pay attention to it." Nothing would never change. Even on the list, there were some warriors who had not appeared in Jianghu for more than 10 years. No one knew whether they were dead or alive, so they were crossed out by wind-sweeping tower. If Dong Chengyun still endured after obtaining such an opportunity, then either his heart was really as hard as iron, or he was a coward. Therefore, Chu Xiao was not worried at all. He just said calmly, "Don't worry, he knows how to choose." When a person suddenly gets something, his mentality will change. There are 2 things in the world that are most difficult to resist. One is power and the other is strength. In the Dong family, Dong Chengyun walked to his room in a daze. The words of that man and the powerful bladesmanship were still echoing in his mind. It was like a dream. He did not even know whether what he had experienced was real or not. At this time, the Dong family was very lively, but Dong Chengyun did not pay attention to it. The rumors in Jianghu were getting more and more fierce. Some forces in West Chu could not help but come to the Dong family. Of course, they did not come to kill people and rob their treasures. They just came to test the Dong family. Although the old ancestor of the Dong family was angry, he had to receive them politely. Some disciples brought by these people were received by the younger generation of the Dong family. At this time, a direct descendant of the Dong family, who was also the disciple who had ridiculed Dong Chengyun in the restaurant, sneered when he saw Dong Chengyun's appearance. He walked over and blocked Dong Chengyun's way. He snorted and said, "Dong Chengyun, the old ancestor and the head of the Dong family are receiving guests. They ordered us to entertain them well. You are also a direct descendant of the Dong family. Why are you showing a dead face here? If you don't want to be a direct descendant of the Dong family, get out of here and serve tea with the collateral disciples. Don't make a fool of yourself here." Some outsiders looked at this scene indifferently. They were not members of the Dong family, so of course, they would not meddle in other people's business. Moreover, they were all from big sects and aristocratic families. This kind of thing was very common, so it was not strange. If you had no ability and no backing, you would be bullied. In this world, there was no love without a reason, but there was hatred without a reason. Dong Chengyun looked at the person in front of him. Feeling the indifferent and malicious eyes of the people around him, he clenched his teeth and kept recalling the words of that person. "Endure, endure, endure. When can I get out of this predicament?" In Dong Chengyun's hand was the weapon rack that the disciples of the Dong family used to practice martial arts. There were some common weapons on it. Dong Chengyun suddenly stretched out his hand and drew a saber. The direct descendant opposite him was still sneering. "What? Do you want to fight? Do you dare? With your strength, you deserve." Before he could finish his words, Dong Chengyun slashed his saber. There was no saber chi. It was just a simple saber, but the saber intent fell like a mountain breaking the sea. The direct descendant of the Dong family in front of him was directly cut in half. Chapter 710. Dong Yunqing had the strength of the Khanate realm, while the direct descendant of the Dong family that he had killed had the strength of the internal formidable realm. It was not unusual for a Khanate expert to kill an internal formidable expert, but what was unusual was Dong Yunqing's saber strike. The saber intent of that strike was so powerful that it made everyone's scalp tingle. It was extremely amazing. After that strike, Dong Yunqing seemed to have regained his senses. He directly turned around and fled. The person he had killed was one of the more outstanding direct descendants of the Dong family. More importantly, his father and grandfather were both deacons or elders of the Dong family. If he continued to stay in the Dong family, he would lose his life. Some disciples of the Dong family present were stunned for a moment. Then they immediately said angrily, "Go and tell the family head to chase after Dong Yunqing immediately." The people of the Dong family were flustered and exasperated, but the people of the other sects present had a subtle expression on their faces. It was rumored in the Jianghu that the Dong family possessed the most powerful saber art, the 7 limits, passed down from ancient times. However, the Dong family had always denied it. But now, judging from the saber intent displayed by the disciple of the Dong family just now, they were sure that it was the 7 limits. Although no one in the Jianghu had seen this martial art, the Dong family had never been good at saber arts. Combined with their previous speculation, what else could it be if it was not the 7 limits? The Dong family had hidden it very deeply. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family and Dong Chikuan were entertaining those who had come to the Dong family to test them. Or rather, it was more appropriate to say that they were pretending to be courteous with them. For these people, the rumors in the Jianghu only made them a little curious, but not to the extent that they would shed all pretense of cordiality to kill and rob. Therefore, they all came to the Dong family with all kinds of excuses to test them. At this time, Chen Jiankong, the sect leader of the Ba Mountain Sword sect, was among these people. He said with a smile, "Brother Dong, your Dong family is so stingy. Why don't you open our eyes when you get the benefits? Brother Dong, are you afraid that we will rob you? Besides, I'm just a sword user. Looking at the 7 limits is just to broaden my horizons. Even if you give it to me for free, I won't learn it." At this moment, Dong Chikuan simply wanted to spit blood, and he said with a helpless expression, "I've said it countless times, my Dong clan really doesn't have any precious treasures. My Dong clan hasn't even held the opening ceremony during this period of time. So where can we find any precious treasures?" Chen Jiankong was just about to say something when he saw a disciple of the Dong clan running over in a panic. He was just about to say something, but when he saw so many people in front of him, he forcefully swallowed his words. He wanted to say something, but when he saw those people in front of him, Dong family, he swallowed his words. Dong Chikuan said, "Chikuan." That disciple knew the big picture. With so many outsiders here, he wouldn't say anything even if he was beaten to death. However, he didn't say anything, but a few more people walked in. They were all witnesses of Dong Chengyun's murder. They immediately went to their respective sect masters or patriarchs and told them the news in a low voice. Chen Jiankong instantly roared with laughter when he heard this, and then he stood up and pointed at Dong Chikuan as he roared with laughter. "Patriarch Dong, how dare you say that your Dong clan doesn't have any precious treasures?" Dong Chikuan was dumbfounded. He stood up and pointed at Dong Chikuan. "Dong clan master, you said your Dong family doesn't have any precious treasures." Dong Chikuan's face was filled with confusion. When he found out what had happened, he could not wait to tear Dong Chengyun's body into pieces. It didn't matter whether Dong Chengyun had used the 7 limits or not. Anyway, the rumor had been confirmed. Everyone here glanced at the Dong clan, and a wisp of surprise appeared in their eyes before they bid their farewells and left. Of course, killing people and robbing them of their treasures wasn't something they could do right now, but they could try some other means. Seeing this scene, Dong Chikuan was so angry that he directly smashed a teacup. But what had already happened. No matter how angry he was, it was useless. He had to send people to search for Dong Chengyun and find this traitor first. When Chu Xiao, who had been staying outside the Dong family, saw Dong Chengyun running out of the Dong family in a panic, he knew what kind of choice he had made. Of course, Chu Xiao didn't care about him. For Chu Xiao, Dong Chengyun was of no value. His role was to confirm the rumor that the Dong family had a treasure and add a trace of truth to it. As for what would happen to Dong Chengyun in the future, it was not Chu Xiao's business. But if he didn't die this time, Chu Xiao had given him a saber. As long as nothing serious happened, he would definitely become a big shot in the future. Now that the first rumor had been confirmed, it was time for Chu Xiao to carry out the next action. Of course, it was the last step. Dong Chengyun was now a strong man with a saber, but he was holding gold in his hand, which could not turn into the 7 treasures glazed glass. At that time, The Dong family would be the focus of everyone's attention. No one in the whole Jianghu knew what the 7 limits looked like. Even in the ancient books of some sects, there were few records of it. At most, there were only a few words. Chu Xiu dared to make a fuss about the 7 limits only because he himself had the real 7 limits, and he also knew that no one had seen the real 7 limits. The reason was very simple. Chu Xiu had used the sea-breaking saber more than once in public, but still no one could see the origin of Chu Xiu's saber. Even the information of wind-sweeping building didn't have it. Even with wind-sweeping tower's level of intelligence, they were unable to find out the history of Chu Xiu's attack, let alone others. Therefore, under the instruction of Chu Xiu, Xie Xiaolu's subordinates spread the rumor to the outside world again. This rumor was more real and attractive than the last time. In this rumor, the Dong family found an ancient relic in the innumerable huge mountains, but they didn't make it public. Instead, they secretly excavated it. The 7 limits were real, the heaven-devouring insects were real, and the Taoist secret book was also real. Originally, the Dong family was planning to make a fortune in silence. However, due to the unfair internal distribution, some of the disciples betrayed the Dong family. The saber technique he used was one of the 7 limits, and many people had witnessed it with their own eyes. As witnesses of that scene, those aristocratic families and sects didn't say anything. They didn't agree or oppose it, but they secretly sent people to lurk around the Dong family, paying attention to the Dong family's movements all the time. At this time, inside the Dong family, Dong Chikuan and the patriarch of the Dong family were both gloomy, not knowing what to do. They had just denied it, but in the blink of an eye, such a thing happened. Who would believe them if they said it was true? What's going on with Dong Chengyun? Why does he know the 7-limit saber method? The patriarch of the Dong family asked with a gloomy face. Dong Chikuan said helplessly, "Who knows?" The other disciples said that they saw Dong Chengyun on the street this morning and mocked him. He didn't say anything. Who would have thought that he would kill him in the afternoon? The patriarch of the Dong family said angrily, "What kind of patriarch are you? Don't you care about the conflicts between the disciples of the family? Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You don't like Dong Chengyun because his father used to compete with you for the position of patriarch. But don't forget, you're the patriarch now, representing the whole Dong family. If you can't even tolerate Dong Chengyun, how can you tolerate the whole Dong family?" Dong Chikuan's face was full of bad luck. He wanted to refute, but in the end, he didn't say anything. In fact, he was really innocent this time. It had nothing to do with him. No matter how petty Dong Chikuan was, he wouldn't rush to compete with a junior martial artist like Dong Chengyun and deliberately suppress him. But the problem was that even if he didn't want to suppress Dong Chengyun, he couldn't protect him, let alone give him a good attitude. So in the eyes of the other disciples of the Dong family, it seemed that Dong Chikuan hated Dong Chengyun, so they tried to make things difficult for Dong Chengyun. In fact, they wanted to win Dong Chikuan's favor, but unfortunately, Dong Chikuan didn't even bother to look at it. Just as they were talking, a strange laughter suddenly came from outside. "Dong Chikuan, we're old friends. I heard that your Dong family obtained a precious treasure. I, your old friend, would like to come and borrow it. I wonder if you can give me some face?" Dong Chikuan's expression changed. He followed the patriarch of the Dong family out of the door and saw a sloppily dressed middle-aged man standing in front of the Dong family's gate. He was holding a strange weapon in his hand. It looked like a sword, but it wasn't a sword, but it wasn't a saber. Dong Chikuan knew this person, and he could indeed be regarded as his good friend. This person was Wang Xuening, the valley master of the Cloud Ridge Valley, a Western Chu itinerant cultivator. He was surly and had an eccentric temper. The number of martial artists in the Cloud Ridge Valley was very small. Sometimes, there were even only one disciple in each lineage. This was because their tempers were too bad. Although they weren't considered demonic, they were still disliked and even hated by the orthodox sections. In the past, when Dong Chikuan had not yet reached the martial arts grandmaster realm, he had been on good terms with Wang Xuening. However, after he became a martial arts grandmaster and then the patriarch of the Dong family, he began to dislike Wang Xuening's identity and character. In the end, they broke off contact. Both parties hadn't seen each other for several years. Now that Wang Xuening had suddenly appeared here, one could imagine what his intentions were. Dong Chikuan frowned and said, Brother Wang, as you said, we're old friends. Do you really believe the rumors outside? What precious treasure or cultivation technique? They're all bullshit. Wang Xuaning's expression sank when he heard that. Dong Qikuan. I know you don't like me. You're the patriarch of the High Hill Dong family, so you definitely have to make friends with the leaders and experts of the large sections. With my bad temper, I can't help you, and I might even bring you trouble. I've never blamed you for alienating me. However, don't forget that before you reached the martial arts grandmaster realm, you were almost killed by a demonic master. Who was it who risked his life and burned his blood essence to save you? I've never asked for this favor. If not for the fact that my cultivation has reached a bottleneck and I'm in urgent need of a cultivation technique, I wouldn't have made this trip. Don't worry. I just want to borrow the 7 limits. I'll just read it inside your Dong family. If I leak a single word of the cultivation technique outside your Dong family, I'll die a horrible death. But you're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.